You get $15, Dad. That was my son's final offer, his voice dripping with the satisfaction of a man about to inherit his mother's $160 fortune. He wanted me front and center at the will reading, just to witness his victory, to see my face when my complete and utter worthlessness was read into legal record. What he didn't know was that my ex-wife, even in death, had one last move to play, and I was the centerpiece of it. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, let me know in the comments where you're listening to this story from, and be sure to like and subscribe if you believe that sometimes the quietest people have the most devastating plans. The sound of the wood planer was my symphony. For the past 5 years, it had been the soundtrack to my life. Each high-pitched whine was a note, each shaving of walnut a verse. Here in my small workshop in Austin, Texas, I wasn't a failed architect. I wasn't a discarded husband. I was just a carpenter. A man who created solid, honest things from broken pieces. My hands, calloused and scarred from years of work, knew the truth of the wood. It never lies. It doesn't deceive. It simply is, with all its knots and imperfections. I respected that. The smell of sawdust and linseed oil was the only cologne I wore. I was working on a rocking chair, feeling the smooth curve of the armrest take shape under my guidance. It was a peaceful existence, a quiet one. Then the peace was shattered. My old flip phone, resting on a cluttered workbench, began to vibrate, its buzzing a harsh intrusion. I hit the kill switch on the planer, and the sudden silence was almost deafening. Wiping my hands on my dusty jeans, I walked over and looked at the screen. 2 words stared back me, cold and foreign: Nathan Thorne. 20 years. That's how long it had been. 20 years without a single phone call that wasn't a demand or an insult. No Christmas cards, no birthday wishes. Just a vast, empty silence built brick by brick with accusations and contempt. I had assumed that silence would last until one of us was in the ground. I suppose I was half right. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of sawdust, and flipped the phone open. My voice was rough from disuse. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was sharp-clipped and belonged to a world a million miles away from my workshop. It was the voice of New York City traffic and $1,000 suits. Julian. He never called me Dad, not anymore. I was Julian, a name he spoke as if it were a mild inconvenience, like a piece of lint on his jacket. Nathan. Your mother is gone. There was no sadness in his voice, no grief. He delivered the line with the emotional detachment of a news anchor reading a teleprompter. Last week. A stroke. It was fast. I stood there motionless, looking out the workshop window at the sun-drenched Texas yard. A strange numbness washed over me. Isabella. Gone. The words didn't seem to fit. She had always been a force of nature, a hurricane of ambition and creativity. Brilliant, beautiful, and utterly destructive. To think of her as just gone felt wrong. He grew impatient with my silence. Did you hear me? The funeral, I started to ask, my throat dry. He cut me off. It's over. You weren't on the list. Now listen, this is why I'm calling. Her lawyer requires your presence. The reading of the will. It's this Friday, 10 a.m. sharp. The offices of Caldwell and Finch, Manhattan. Don't be late. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. A command delivered from on high from a son who had long ago appointed himself king of a world I no longer belonged to. I finally found my voice, keeping it steady. I have no reason to be there, Nathan. Isabella and I made everything clear 20 years ago in that courtroom. I have nothing that belongs to her, and she has nothing that belongs to me. A sound came through the phone, then a short, ugly bark of a laugh. It was a sound stripped of all humor, a noise of pure, unadulterated scorn. And that sound, more than anything else he could have said, stirred something deep inside me. "Oh, I know you're not getting a dime," he sneered. "Don't be a fool. My mother despised you, but it's a legal formality, a procedural thing. You have to be there in person to officially hear that you are a zero. A documented, notarized confirmation of your irrelevance to this family." He paused, letting the poison sink in. "Personally, I just want to be there to see your face. I want to watch that quiet, fake dignity of yours crumble when you hear it read out loud. It's the only entertainment you're good for anymore." The humiliation was so raw, so direct, it was almost impressive. This wasn't the anger of a wounded son. This was the calculated cruelty of a victor wanting to rub his opponent's face in the dirt. "Are you finished?" I asked, my voice dangerously. "Almost," he said, his tone dripping with condescending amusement. "Don't worry about the trip back. I'll spot you $15 for the bus ride home. Think of it as a parting gift." And then the line went dead. Click. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. The silence of the workshop rushed back in, but it was different now. It was heavy, suffocating. Anger and old emotion I had buried under years of sawdust and resignation began to smolder. It wasn't a raging fire. It was a hot coal buried deep, slowly glowing red. He hadn't invited me to a will reading. He had summoned me to a public execution. My execution. He wanted a show. Fine. He would get one. I closed the phone and set it down with deliberate care. I walked over to the half-finished rocking chair and ran my hand along its smooth, honest curve. Then I turned and walked out of the workshop into the small house attached to it. I went to my closet past the flannel shirts and worn jeans that were my daily uniform. In the very back, covered in a thin layer of dust, was a garment bag. I hadn't touched it in 2 decades. I pulled it out and unzipped it. Inside hung my only suit, a charcoal gray suit, the same one I had worn on the day my old life ended. I would wear it again for the beginning of his. Friday morning. The cab ride from LaGuardia felt like passing through another dimension. The quiet, sun-baked streets of Austin were a distant memory replaced by the towering canyons of steel and glass that made up Manhattan. I paid the driver the fare, stinging more than I expected, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The air was colder here, sharper. The building for Caldwell and Finch was exactly what you'd expect. It didn't just occupy the street, it dominated it. A sheer cliff of dark glass and polished granite. I pushed through the revolving glass doors, and the noise of the city was instantly cut off, replaced by a deep, reverent hush. The lobby was a cathedral built to worship money. The floors were acres of white marble, so polished I could see the distorted reflection of the ceiling lights high above. The walls were paneled in dark, glossy mahogany, smelling faintly of lemon oil and old wealth. I had spent my entire life designing buildings, but I had never designed a space like this. This wasn't built for people. It was built to intimidate, to remind every person who entered just how small they were. And I felt small. I was wearing my only suit, the charcoal gray one. The fabric was good wool, so fine you couldn't find it much anymore, but it was 20 years out of style. The cut was too generous, the shoulders too padded. It was clean. I had pressed it myself back in Austin until the crease on the pants was sharp as a knife, but it was old. It was the suit I had worn to the divorce hearing. The last time I had seen Isabella face to face. The last time I had seen her look at me with anything other than cold disappointment, fueled by the lies my son had whispered in her ear. I could still smell the faint trace of mothballs, a scent of preservation and decay. As I walked toward the reception desk, my old leather-soled shoes made a lonely click-clack on the marble. The sound seemed to echo embarrassingly loud in the tomb-like silence. A few young lawyers, men and women in their 30s, wearing suits that cost more than my truck, glanced up from their phones. Their eyes didn't linger. They scanned, categorized, and dismissed me in a single fluid motion. I wasn't a client. I wasn't a threat. I was just old, an anomaly. I felt like a smudge of grease on a pristine white canvas, an ink stain spreading across a legal document. I didn't belong. And that I knew was the entire point. This was Nathan's first move, summoning me here to his territory, to this fortress of power, while I was wearing the armor of my greatest defeat. I reached the reception desk, a slab of marble that looked like it had been carved from a mountain. The woman behind it was young blonde, and wore a headset so sleek it looked like part of her. "Can I help you?" Her voice was bright, but her eyes were bored. "I'm here for a 10 o'clock meeting," I said, my voice sounding rough like unsanded wood. "The reading of Isabella Thorne's will. My name is Julian Thorne." Her eyes flickered. The name Thorne registered, but the face didn't match. She was expecting, no doubt, someone who looked like Nathan, someone who belonged. Not me. A flicker of confusion, then disdain passed over her features before the professional mask snapped back into place. "Of course," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Mr. Harrison is expecting you. Please take a seat. They will be with you shortly." She gestured toward a waiting area, a collection of low-slung black leather sofas arranged around a massive glass table. I sat down on the edge of one. The leather was cold and stiff. I clasped my hands together, my rough, calloused carpenter's hands resting on the fabric of my old suit. I looked at the abstract, expensive art on the walls. It meant nothing to me. It was just color and shape designed to fill a space. I was a ghost, a relic from a past they had all agreed to bury, and I was sitting here waiting to be told that I was officially legally worth nothing, just as my son had promised. The anger from that phone call, the hot, simmering coal, burned a little brighter. I was not here to be humiliated. I was here to finish this. They didn't just walk into the waiting room. They made an entrance. It was Nathan, and he wasn't alone. He moved with an unearned confidence, the swagger of a man who has never been told no in his life. He wore a navy blue Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. It fit him perfectly, accentuating a physique that was maintained by personal trainers, not hard labor. His hair was slicked back. His watch was a glint of gold and steel at his wrist. And his expression was one of bored entitlement. Trailing him were his accessories. The first was a young woman impossibly thin and startlingly beautiful in a severe artificial way. She was squeezed into a tight designer dress and clutched a Hermes purse like it was a life raft. Her name, I would learn, was Sophia. She was engrossed in her phone, her thumb flicking endlessly across the screen. The second was a man in his 40s with a tan that was too perfect for October in New York, and teeth that were too white to be real. He had the fixed, predatory smile of a shark. This had to be Kyle, the financial advisor. They weren't a family mourning a loss. They were a pack of predators circling what they believed was their kill. Nathan strode to the reception desk, not even glancing in my direction. Nathan Thorne. He announced, his voice echoing slightly in the large space. Harrison is expecting me. The receptionist, who had barely looked at me, was suddenly all smiles and efficiency. Yes, Mr. Thorne. Right away, Mr. Thorne. Please have a seat. He turned then, intending to claim one of the leather sofas, and his eyes finally landed on me. He stopped. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. It was the smile of a cat that has just cornered a mouse. He walked over his expensive shoes, silent on the marble. His two companions followed, their curiosity piqued. My God! He said, his voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. You actually came. He looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on my old suit, the worn collar of my shirt. I guess you really do need that $15. Sophia. The young woman looked up from her phone for the first time. She let out a short, high-pitched giggle, the sound like breaking glass. Kyle's shark-like smile widened. He looked me over not as a person, but as a piece of outdated furniture, something to be cleared out and thrown away. He didn't even bother to offer a hand, just a dismissive clinical assessment. Nathan gestured vaguely in my direction, addressing his two disciples. This, he said, and the way he paused was an insult in itself, is my father. He said the word father as if it were a dirty secret, an unfortunate biological fact he was forced to acknowledge. It was an apology. He was apologizing to them for my very existence, for my shabby suit, for my worn-out shoes, for my failure to be someone who reflected his own perceived glory. I remembered him at 10 years old. Christmas morning. I had spent weeks in my workshop, back when I still had one hand crafting a detailed model of a battleship. I had been so proud of it. Nathan opened the box, looked at it for a second, and tossed it aside. It's not a brand name, he'd whined. I want what my friends have. Isabella, always quick to fix any problem with money, had swooped in with an expensive video game console. She had created this monster one spoiled whim at a time. This man standing before me wasn't a man at all. He was just a collection of appetites wrapped in a $10,000 suit. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. I met his smug, arrogant gaze and held it. I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself. My silence seemed to unnerve him more than any angry retort could have. He was expecting a reaction, begging, pleading anger, anything to confirm his power over me. I gave him nothing. I just sat there, a ghost in a gray suit, watching the show he was so desperate to produce. His smile tightened. He wasn't having as much fun as he'd planned. He turned away from me, speaking to Kyle. So the first thing we do is liquidate the real estate portfolio in. He was cut off by the sound of a heavy oak door opening. A man stood in the doorway, and the entire atmosphere in the room shifted. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The show was about to begin. My son stood there basking in the glow of his own arrogance, and my mind drifted back. Christmas morning. He was 10. The whole house smelled of pine needles and baking cinnamon. I had spent weeks in my workshop, the old one, crafting a model battleship for him by hand. It was a perfect replica of the USS Missouri. I'd carved the tiny cannons, coiled the miniature ropes, hand-painted the flag on the stern. I was so proud of it. I thought he would love it. He opened a box, looked at it for maybe 3 seconds, and then tossed it onto the floor. "It's not a brand name," he'd announced to the room. "I want what my friends have." And Isabella, my wife, she hadn't corrected him. She hadn't explained the value of a gift made with love. She had just swooped in with a brightly wrapped box containing the latest, most expensive video game console. She wasn't being kind. She was being easy. She had built this monster piece by piece, buying his affection because earning it was too much work. And even then, I think she knew it. The memory was so clear, it was almost a taste in my mouth, bitter and sad. It was cut short by the sound of a heavy oak door swinging open. A man in his 60s stood in the doorway. He was tall and wore an impeccable gray suit that spoke of quiet authority, not flashy wealth. This was Mr. Harrison. He had the face of a judge, impassive and difficult to read, with eyes that didn't just see you. They assessed you, weighed you, and filed you away. The quiet confidence he radiated instantly silenced the room. Even Nathan seemed to shrink a little. His gaze swept across the room, passing over Nathan and his entourage, as if they were part of the furniture. And then his eyes landed on me. First he held my gaze for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something in his expression. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to understanding. He walked toward me. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice level and respectful. "Thank you for coming." He didn't offer a hand, but the words were a handshake in themselves. They were a simple acknowledgement of my presence, of my right to be there. Then, and only then, did he turn to my son. "Mr. Thorne," he said. The same name, but the tone was different. Colder, formal, stripped of any warmth. The slight was so subtle that a lesser man might have missed it. But Nathan's entire world was built on a fragile scaffolding of status and special treatment. The fact that I, the outcast, had been acknowledged first was a direct challenge to his authority. I saw a flicker of annoyance in his eyes, a tightening of his jaw. He tried to cover it with a wave of dismissive arrogance. "Let's get this over with, Harrison." He snapped, his voice sharp with impatience. "I have a reservation at Per Se to celebrate. I don't intend to be late." Mr. Harrison's expression didn't change. He simply nodded once. "As you wish," he said, turning and holding the door to the conference room open. "This way, gentlemen." The conference room was just as cold and imposing as the lobby, but with an added layer of finality. A single massive table made of dark, polished mahogany filled the center of the room. It was so reflective it looked like a dark pool of water. Floor-to-ceiling windows lined one wall, but they didn't offer a view of the sky, just a close-up, sterile look at the gray skyscraper across the street. It was a room designed for executing contracts and crushing opponents. Nathan naturally took the seat at the opposite end of the table from the door, the one that clearly marked him as the new head of the family. He leaned back, spreading his arms wide, staking his claim. Sophia and Kyle sat on either side of him like a queen and bishop protecting their king. I took a seat near the door, an afterthought. I was just there to fill the chair, a legal requirement. I placed my calloused hands on the table, a stark contrast to the perfect, unblemished wood. Mr. Harrison walked to the head of the table. He didn't sit. He placed a thick, leather-bound document on the surface with a soft, definitive thud. The air in the room seemed to get thinner. He deliberately pulled his chair out, sat down, and then with methodical slowness reached into his breast pocket and produced a pair of simple, gold-rimmed reading glasses. He put them on his movements, precise, unhurried. He was in complete control. He opened the binder. The pages were thick, creamy. He cleared his throat. "This," he began, his voice filling the room, "is the last will and testament of Isabella Montoya Thorne, dated August 4th of this year. I, Isabella Montoya Thorne." Even from the grave, she was making a statement. She had taken my name in marriage, but she had built her empire with hers. Montoya, a name that was a brand. A name worth, according to my son, $160 million. Harrison's voice was a monotone, a perfect instrument for legal documents. "Being of sound mind and body, I do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all former wills and codicils heretofore made by me." Nathan sighed of impatient air and glanced at his expensive watch. He was already bored. "First," Harrison continued, "I direct that all my just debts and funeral expenses be paid from my estate." He paused, then turned the first page. "Second, I give and bequeath the sum of $50,000 tax-free to my housekeeper, Maria Gonzalez, in gratitude for her 25 years of loyal service and her unending patience." I saw Nathan roll his eyes. He muttered something to Kyle that I couldn't hear, but the word peanuts was unmistakable. I, however, found myself smiling. Just a small internal twitch of the lips. Maria. I remembered her. She had been with Isabella even before the money got truly big. A kind, quiet woman who had always had a cup of hot coffee for me in the kitchen after one of my spectacular arguments with Isabella. She had seen it all. She deserved every penny. It was a flicker of the woman I once knew. Isabella could be generous. She just chose her moments. Third, Harrison read on his voice, unwavering, "I give and bequeath the sum of $100,000 to the Monarch Butterfly Preservation Fund." This time it was Sophia who reacted. She let out a little disbelieving scoff. "Butterflies," she whispered to Nathan loud enough for me to hear. "Is she serious?" I felt a sudden sharp pang in my chest. Not sadness. Something more complicated. Nostalgia. Before Nathan was born, before Montoya Designs, was an empire Isabella and I had driven an old Jeep down to Mexico. We had slept in cheap motels and hiked for miles into the mountains to see the monarch sanctuaries. I remembered her standing in a clearing, the air thick with millions of orange and black wings, her face tilted up to the sky, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, Julian," she had whispered. "It's like all the souls in the world flying home." She had remembered. Even after all the bitterness, all the lawyers, all the silent years, she had remembered that day. This wasn't just a bequest. It was a message. Fourth, I give and bequeath the sum of $25,000 to my driver, Miguel Rodriguez, for his excellent service and for never once commenting on the colorful guests my son brought to my home. Nathan sat bolt upright. What the hell does that mean? Kyle put a hand on his arm. It's nothing, Nathan. Just a little joke. It means nothing. But Nathan was getting visibly agitated. This wasn't going according to his script. He was supposed to be the star, and the opening act was getting too much attention. He began to tap his fingers on the mahogany table. A sharp, impatient tap, tap, tap that echoed in the quiet room. Harrison ignored him and continued. Fifth, I give and bequeath my collection of first edition modernist poetry to the New York Public Library. Tap, tap, tap. With the exception of one volume, a 1922 copy of T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, which I leave to Nathan, slammed his hand flat on the table. The sound was like a gunshot. Harrison, for God's sake, he boomed. Can we skip the charity donations and the servants' tips? My time is valuable. I have a reservation. Just get to the main event, the real estate, the portfolio, the money. Just get to the part where it all goes to me. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Mr. Harrison stopped reading. He did not look startled. He did not look angry. He simply stopped. Very slowly, he raised his head, his eyes still behind the reading glasses. Then, with a deliberation that was more threatening than any shout, he took the glasses off. He folded them. He placed them on the table. And he stared at my son. His gaze was flat cold and utterly unimpressed. It was the look of a man who had dealt with spoiled children his entire life and was in this final moment done with it. Mr. Thorne, Harrison said, and his voice had dropped, losing its monotone, becoming a precise, sharp instrument. This is not a negotiation. It is not a business meeting. It is the legal proclamation of a deceased woman's final wishes. I will read every single word in this document exactly as your mother wrote it. And you will sit there and you will listen. Is that clear? Nathan's face flushed a dark, ugly red. He had been challenged. He had been dressed down like a child. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Kyle, who subtly shook his head. He was trapped. Harrison held his gaze for one beat longer, then satisfied, he put his glasses back on. He picked up the document. He deliberately flattened the page, took a small composed sip of water from a glass beside him, and cleared his throat. He had made my son wait. He had re-established control. Very well, Harrison said, his voice returning to the neutral monotone. Let us continue. Fifth, as I was saying, I leave my first edition copy of The Wasteland to... He paused, and I could have sworn I saw the barest hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Ah, no. That's been struck. Let's move on. Sixth, regarding the personal associates of my son. Harrison's gaze lingered on Nathan for a moment longer, a silent assertion of dominance. Then, as if a switch had been flicked, he returned to the document, his voice resuming its steady, neutral cadence. We now move, he said, to Article 6 regarding the personal associates of my son, Nathan Thorne. I saw Kyle, the financial advisor, sit up a little straighter. His shark-like smile was back fixed in place. He smoothed the lapel of his expensive suit, adjusting his posture, ready to receive his expected bonus for managing Nathan's anticipated fortune. Sophia beside him finally put her phone down, her eyes bright with greedy anticipation. Harrison continued, To my son's financial advisor, Mr. Kyle Vance, he pronounced the title with a slight, almost imperceptible emphasis, as if placing it in quotation marks. I give and bequeath the sum of $5,000. Kyle's smile froze. 5,000. The number hung in the air, shockingly small. It was an insult. It was less than the cost of his suit. I saw his knuckles whiten as he gripped the edge of the table. Nathan looked at him annoyed, as if Kyle's disappointment was a personal affront. But Harrison wasn't finished. I bequeath this sum with the attached legally binding recommendation that he use it to enroll in a course on professional ethics. My own financial records show he has a significant need for a refresher on the topic. The shark-like smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pale, stunned fury. His head snapped toward Nathan, his eyes wide. "What is this?" he hissed, his voice a low vibration of rage. He had just been called a crook in a room full of people, and Harrison continued, not missing a beat, turning his attention to the young woman beside Nathan. "To my son's current companion, Sophia, I leave her the high-quality imitation handbag she attempted to swap for my authentic Birkin bag in my closet last month." If Kyle was stunned, Sophia was incinerated. Her perfectly made-up face turned a dark, blotchy red. Her mouth dropped open. She hadn't just been insulted, she had been exposed. Exposed as a petty common thief. In front of the man she was clearly trying to trap. In front of the lawyer. In front of me, the ghost she hadn't even bothered to acknowledge. "Crazy old hag," she shrieked, her voice cracking, all pretense of sophistication gone. "She lied, I never shut up," Nathan roared, his voice bouncing off the mahogany walls. He wasn't defending her. He was silencing a problem. His carefully constructed image was crumbling. His entourage was being dismantled piece by a dead woman's words. He was furious, not because they were insulted, but because this was taking too long. This was messy. This was not part of his victory celebration. "It doesn't matter," he snarled at both of them. "It's nothing. It's a joke. Who cares about a bag? Who cares about $5,000? He turned his furious gaze back to the lawyer. "Get on with it, Harrison. Stop wasting time with this trash and get to my part." I sat there perfectly still, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt a connection to Isabella. This was the woman I had married. Not the victim my son had painted her to be, but a brilliant, cold, and lethally precise woman. She wasn't just reading a will. She was settling every last score. She was burning down the peripheral parts of Nathan's life, isolating him, leaving him with nothing but his own greed. She was in her own way, clearing the table before the main course. Mr. Harrison, completely unbothered by the outburst, simply waited for the shouting to subside. He looked at Nathan, his expression unreadable. "As I have already stated, Mr. Thorne, I will read every word. Now, if I may continue." I sat there watching the fallout from Isabella's words. Kyle looked like he'd swallowed poison, and Sophia was trembling with pure, unadulterated rage. And I thought to myself, that was the Isabella I remembered. She never forgot a slight. She never let an insult go unanswered. She kept a perfect, detailed ledger of every wrong ever done to her. And even in death, from inside a leather-bound document, she was still surgically precise. She was still settling her accounts. Harrison let the silence settle for a moment longer. Then he turned the page. The room tensed. This was it. After clearing away the trash, this was the main event. Article 7. Harrison said, his voice dropping back into that neutral, legal tone. To my son, Nathan Thorne. Nathan leaned forward. His breathing was shallow. His knuckles were white on the table. He had forgotten his humiliated companions. All his focus, all his greed, was now laser-focused on the lawyer. I give and bequeath the penthouse apartment on Park Avenue. A huge sigh of relief escaped Nathan. A genuine full-body exhale. The color returned to his face. He smirked, shooting a triumphant look first at Kyle, then at me. The penthouse, the crown jewel. It was his. And Harrison continued my complete collection of Patek Philippe watches. Nathan's smirk widened into a grin. He laughed a short, sharp bark. Yes, now we're talking. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming. Hear that, old man? The Pateks, all of them. Harrison raised a single finger, stopping Nathan's celebration cold. However, he said, and the word hung in the air like a blade, the watch collection is stored in a secure safe located within the penthouse. The single key to that safe. Harrison paused. He looked down at this document, then looked up, his eyes finding mine across the long expanse of the mahogany table. I have entrusted to his father, Julian Thorne. The silence that followed was absolute. It was so complete I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Sophia and Kyle, lost in their own humiliation moments before, snapped their heads toward me. Nathan just stared. His face, which had been flushed with victory, went pale. His grin dissolved. What? His voice was quiet, disbelieving. What did you just say? He asked Harrison, his voice rising. The key, Mr. Thorne, was entrusted to your father. Nathan slammed his hands on the table and stood up the chair, scraping violently behind him. What are you talking about? Is this a joke? A sick joke? He pointed a shaking finger at me. Him. He hasn't seen her in 20 years. He doesn't even know where she lived. He's a nobody. Every eye in the room was on me, and I was just as stunned as he was. I stared at Harrison, my mind reeling. A key. Isabella had given me a key. What did it mean? Was it another one of her games? Another way to twist the knife, even from the grave. I had no key. I had no idea what any of them were talking about. I just sat there, the ghost in the gray suit, suddenly, and very uncomfortably, the center of everyone's attention. My son was screaming. His face was a mask of disbelief and rage. But I wasn't really in that cold mahogany room anymore. As Mr. Harrison shuffled the papers, the sound of the thick, creamy stock sliding against itself seemed to pull me back through 20 years of anger and silence to a different kind of crisis. I wasn't in New York. I was in our old house in Connecticut. It was 2002. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and the house was dark except for the single light in Isabella's home office. I found her there, not crying, but worse. She was just sitting, staring at a wall of spreadsheets, her face pale and completely blank. She looked broken. Montoya Designs, the company that was her life, her passion, her entire identity, was bleeding out. It was on verge of total catastrophic collapse. She had overextended, pouring millions into a luxury resort project in the Caribbean. She had trusted the wrong partners. The entire deal was built on a foundation of bad permits and shifting sand. And now it had all fallen apart. The banks were calling in their loans. Her investors were threatening to sue her into oblivion. She was facing not just bankruptcy, but disgrace. I remember sitting down next to her in that dark office, the computer screen casting ghostly shadows on her face. "It's over, Julian." She had whispered, her voice hollow. "Everything I've built, it's all gone. They're going to take the house. They're going to take everything." She wasn't just afraid of being poor. We had been poor before when we started. She was terrified of being a failure, of being seen as a fool. Her entire world was built on her reputation as a brilliant, infallible businesswoman. And now that reputation was about to be publicly executed. She looked at me, her eyes, usually so full of fire and ambition, were just empty. "They're talking about criminal negligence." She'd said the words barely audible. "They're saying I misled them." I looked at the woman who was my wife, the mother of my son, the brilliant, infuriating, passionate woman I had loved. And I knew in that moment that she was drowning, and she was about to pull all of us down with her. The memory from 2005 solidified, sharp and agonizing. Isabella sitting in her office, utterly broken. She didn't just look broken. She was broken. For a week, our house was a tomb. The phones rang off the hook calls from angry bankers and betrayed investors. Isabella just let them ring. She stopped eating. She stopped sleeping. She would just sit in her office, staring at the company's financials on her computer screen, watching the numbers bleed into a sea of red. She was paralyzed. She was drowning. And then about a week into this living nightmare, a hand reached out. It didn't come from a bank. It didn't come from a friend or a trusted colleague. It came from an encrypted email routed through a server in the United Arab Emirates. It was an offer for a meeting. A private equity group I had never heard of based in Dubai. They said they had been following Montoya Designs for some time. They saw potential. Isabella was too far gone to go, too paranoid to even speak on the phone. She was a ghost. She begged me to go. I was still her husband, her partner in life, even if I wasn't her partner in business. I was the architect. I understood the construction side of her empire better than anyone. So I went. I met them in a sterile, soulless conference room at a hotel near JFK Airport. There were 3 of them. They were not bankers. They were young, impeccably dressed in dark, identical suits, and they had the dead cold eyes of men who had seen too much. They were polite. Too polite. It was the kind of politeness that feels more threatening than a direct insult. They laid out the terms on the table. It was on the surface a miracle. It was breathtakingly simple. They would inject $100 million into Montoya Designs, effective immediately. Enough to stabilize the Caribbean project. Enough to pay off the angriest bankers. Enough to silence the lawsuits that were threatening criminal charges. It was a total rescue. I sat there stunned. In return, I asked, my voice cautious, "What do you want in return?" The lead negotiator, a man with a faint British accent, just slid a thin leather-bound folder across the table. "We are investors, Mr. Thorne. We simply want to invest in future projects. We believe in the Montoya brand. We want to help you build." I brought that folder home. It felt heavy, like it was made of lead. Isabella, desperate for any shred of hope, tore it open. For the first 10 minutes, she was ecstatic. She was laughing, crying, holding the pages to her chest. "We're saved, Julian. We're saved." But I was reading the fine print. I was an architect. I spent my entire life reading contracts. I spent my life looking at blueprints. And this wasn't a bailout. It was a blueprint for a crime. Isabella, I said, my voice quiet, cutting through her celebration. Look at this, the projected costs. I pointed to the addendum, the appendix, the part they hoped we wouldn't read. It detailed the future projects they wanted to fund, a series of luxury high-rises. Look at the numbers, I said. They're wrong. They're all wrong. The cost projections, they're inflated by at least 40%. She didn't get it at first. She was too blinded by the $100 million lifeline. So what? She said, waving her hand. They're overpaying. That's their problem, not ours. No, I said, and a cold dread was creeping up my spine. That's how it works. That's the point. It's not an investment, Isabella. It's a washing machine. The smile on her face flickering. What are you talking about? They give us $100 million in clean capital now. I explained, my voice flat. It saves the company. It makes us whole. In return, we build their future projects. But we don't build them for the real cost. We build them for the inflated cost. We build them for $140 million. We pay their shell companies, their suppliers in the Cayman Islands. That extra $40 million, we take their dirty money and we make it clean. We make it look like legitimate construction payments. I tapped the signature page. They're not investing, Isabella. They're laundering. And they want to use your company, your name, as the detergent. The color drained from her face. She finally truly understood. She had spent her entire life, her entire soul, building the Montoya name into a symbol of luxury, quality, and integrity. And these men were going to use it to wash their blood money. No, she whispered. I won't do it. Then we declare bankruptcy, I said, stating the simple, brutal fact. It's over. No! She screamed. The word ripped out of her throat. She jumped up, pacing the office like a caged animal, her hands twisting in her hair. No, I can't. You don't understand, Julian. She grabbed the front of my shirt, her nails digging into my chest. If we go bankrupt, they'll investigate. They'll do a forensic audit. They'll find the Caribbean mess. They'll say I was negligent. They'll say I committed fraud. Her eyes were wild with terror. It's better than this, Isabella, I pleaded. This is a criminal enterprise. This is the mob or worse. I don't care, she shrieked. And then she just collapsed. She didn't faint. She just crumpled onto the expensive Persian rug, her strength gone. She wasn't a CEO anymore. She wasn't an empire builder. She was just a terrified woman trapped. Julian, she wept, her voice muffled by the carpet. Please, please, I can't go to jail. I can't go to jail. She looked up at me, her face a ruin of mascara and terror. It was a look I had never seen on her, a look of absolute bottomless desperation. I can't lose the company, she whispered, her voice cracking. I can't. It's me. It's everything I am. If I lose Montoya Designs, I'm nothing. I'm just nothing. She grabbed my hand, her own ice cold. And Nathan, she choked out. What about Nathan? He's at Yale. He's on top of the world. Do you want him to be the son of a convict, of a bankrupt failure? He'll be humiliated. He'll hate me. He'll hate us. Please, Julian. There has to be a way. Please. She was hysterical. She was right. She was trapped. If she refused the deal, she would be ruined and jailed for fraud. If she took the deal, she would be ruined and jailed for money laundering. She had built her own prison. I stood there watching her fall apart. This brilliant, driven, impossible woman. The woman who had built an empire from nothing. The woman who was also at times so blinded by her own ambition, she couldn't see the cliff edge until she was already over it. I looked at the contracts on the desk. I looked at the blueprints for the fake condos. I was an architect. I knew this world. I knew how these deals were structured. I knew how to hide costs. I knew how to create shell corporations for supplies and labor. I knew how to build the legal firewalls, how to compartmentalize a project so the dirt wouldn't spread. I could see a path, a single, terrible, dangerous path, a way to do what they wanted, but to keep her name, her signature, her public face clean. She begged again. Julian, please, what are we going to do? I looked at her, the woman I had loved, the mother of my son, and I made the choice. The one. The choice that would define the rest of my life. The choice that would save her company, and in doing so would destroy me. I reached down and pulled her to her feet. I held her by the shoulders. Stop, I said. My voice was calm. It was the preternatural calm of a man who has just accepted his fate. Stop crying. Go to your room. Go to bed. She looked at me, her eyes wide and confused. What, you are going to have no part in this, I said, my voice firm. You will not sign these papers. You will not take these meetings. You will not be on these emails. You will focus on designing. You will focus on saving the public face of the company. You will do what you do best. A tiny, desperate flicker of hope sparked in her tear-filled eyes. But the deal, the money, the contracts. I turned from her and walked to the desk. I picked up the heavy leather-bound folder. I looked at the signature page, the one meant for her, the president and CEO of Montoya Designs. Let me handle this, I said. I became a ghost. While Isabella went back to being the face of Montoya Designs, attending galas and approving fabric swatches, I moved into the shadows. I became the intermediary. I was the one who flew to Zurich, to Dubai, to Grand Cayman. I was the one who sat in sterile hotel rooms negotiating payment schedules with men who had no last names. Back in New York, I used my architect's license, my name, my reputation, to create a series of shell corporations. Thorn Construction, Thorn Project Management, Thorn Architectural Supply. I built a labyrinth of legal entities, a complex firewall designed for one purpose: to stop the dirt from ever reaching Isabella. The $100 million bailout came through. Montoya Designs was saved. The bankers were paid. The lawsuits vanished. Isabella was celebrated in the financial pages as a genius who had weathered the storm, and then the second part of the deal began. The laundering. I was the one who signed the inflated construction contracts. I was the one who approved the wire transfers to anonymous accounts. I was the one who personally oversaw the creation of fraudulent invoices, certifying that millions of dollars of Italian marble or German steel had been delivered to sites when in fact nothing had arrived but a bank receipt. I was good at it. Terrifyingly good. My architect's mind, so used to building solid, real structures, was just as adept at building hollow, fake ones. For 2 years, I lived a double life. I was a respected architect by day and a high-stakes money launderer by night. I saved her company. I saved her name. I saved her from prison. But you can't move that much dirty money without someone noticing. The FBI didn't come for Isabella. They didn't even know she was involved. They came for me. They had been tracking the Dubai group for years. They saw the money flow into my shell companies. They saw the inflated contracts. They saw the fraudulent invoices. They saw my name, my signature, my architect's seal of approval on documents that were pure fiction. They didn't kick the door in. It was quiet. 2 men in dark suits waiting for me in my office one morning. They laid it all out. They had the wire transfers. They had the surveillance photos of my meetings at JFK. They had me, dead to rights. They offered me a deal. "Tell us who you're working for," the lead agent said. "Give us the organization. Give us the people in Dubai. Give us the real beneficiary of this scheme." I looked at the file on the table. My name was on every page. Isabella's was nowhere. I had done my job too well. I had a choice. I could give them Isabella. I could tell them the whole story. How she was terrified. How she had begged me. How I had done it all to save her and our son from ruin. They might have been lenient. They might have understood. Or I could take the fall. I thought about Isabella terrified and broken on the office floor. I thought about Nathan at Yale with his entire future ahead of him. A future built on his mother's glittering empire. An empire that was now technically funded by criminals. So I made the second choice. The one that sealed my fate. "I don't know what you're talking about," I told them. I was overextended. I made some bad deals. I got sloppy with the books. There's no organization. It was just me. I cut corners. I was desperate. I gave them a confession, but not the one they wanted. I confessed to professional negligence, to tax evasion, to falsifying business records. I played the part of a foolish, greedy architect who got in over his head. To protect Isabella from a money laundering conviction, I had to plead guilty to something. So I did. I didn't go to prison. My lawyers, paid for by Isabella's now stable company, made sure of that. But I lost everything else. I lost my architect's license, revoked permanently. I lost my reputation. My name was dragged through the mud. Julian Thorne, disgraced architect. I was a pariah. And that's when my son Nathan twisted the knife. He was 22, home from Yale, and he saw his chance. He went to his mother not in comfort, but in anger. "He betrayed you." Nathan had screamed at her, a performance I learned about later. "He used your company. He embezzled money behind your back. He's a criminal. He humiliated you. He humiliated me." He presented her with an easy narrative, a simple story. In his version, I wasn't the savior. I was the villain. And Isabella, seeing her company saved, seeing her name completely clear, and seeing my name utterly destroyed, she took the easy way out. She chose the story that made her the victim. She chose her son's version of the truth. She filed for divorce. She claimed she was the wronged party, The trusting wife betrayed by her greedy criminal husband. And she let Nathan, our son, believe it. She let the whole world believe it. She never said a word in my defense. She just let me burn. That was the price for saving her. The voice was calm, but it sliced through 20 years of memory like a sharp chisel. I blinked. The dark, desperate office in Connecticut dissolved, replaced by the cold, polished mahogany of the conference room. My heart was pounding. The past felt more real than the present. I looked up. Mr. Harrison was watching me, his expression neutral. But everyone else was staring at me. Kyle, the financial advisor, had a look of greedy calculation in his eyes. Sophia, the girlfriend, was looking at me as if for the first time a flicker of curiosity in her otherwise vacant expression. And Nathan. My son was staring at me with an intensity that was almost frightening. His face was a thundercloud of suspicion and rage. The veins in his neck were standing out. The key. He spat, his voice low and dangerous. Where is it? What did she give you? He was convinced that this was a scheme. A final bitter trick played by his mother with me as her willing accomplice. He saw conspiracy in every shadow. I looked from his furious face to Mr. Harrison's calm one, searching for an answer. But there was none. My mind was a complete blank. The last 2 decades had been a quiet life of wood shavings and solitude. A key to a safe full of watches. It was absurd. It was a detail from a life that was no longer mine. It felt like a line from someone else's script. I looked back at my son. His entire $160 million inheritance in his mind was now being held up by me, the ghost he had summoned here for his own amusement. I shook my head, not in defiance, but in genuine bewilderment. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, and it was the absolute truth. I don't know hung in the air, a simple, unadorned fact. Nathan stared at me, his face a canvas of pure disbelief, which quickly curdled into contemptuous rage. He was processing this new variable, this impossible complication. He was a bull that had been momentarily stunned by a cattle prod, but it only lasted a second. He let out a harsh, guttural laugh. It was a forced sound, a performance meant to signal that he was still in control, that this was all just a minor, absurd annoyance. It doesn't matter, he snapped, waving his hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. A key? You think I care about a key? You think I'm going to go on some treasure hunt with him? He laughed again, louder this time. I'll have a locksmith drill open that safe before lunch. It's irrelevant, a meaningless sentimental game by a dying woman. He sat back down, but he wasn't relaxed. He was coiled like a spring wound too tight. He pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Mr. Harrison. Enough of these games. He punctuated each word. Enough of the servants. Enough of the butterflies. And enough of the keys. Get to the point, Harrison. The main event, the assets, the $160 million. Read the part where it all comes to me. Read it. Now. Mr. Harrison regarded my son over the top of his reading glasses. He showed no fear. He showed no annoyance. He simply let Nathan's command hang in the air, letting its own arrogance suffocate it in the heavy silence. Then, with that same infuriating, methodical calm, he adjusted his glasses, took a small, deliberate sip of water from a crystal glass, and turned the page. The sound of the thick, creamy paper turning was like a crack of thunder in the tense room. It was the sound of a judge turning to the final page of a verdict. He was savoring this. He was following Isabella's script to the absolute letter. "Of course," Mr. Harrison said, his voice returning to that flat, neutral tone. "We will now proceed to Article 8, the disposition of the primary estate, the residue of all property, real and personal, wherever situated." This was it. The air in the room was so thick I felt I could barely breathe. Nathan was leaning so far forward, he was almost out of his chair, his whole body a single taut muscle of greed. Even Kyle and Sophia, despite their public humiliation, were watching with rapt, desperate attention. This was the moment that would make their own small humiliations worthwhile. Harrison read from the page. "Regarding all remaining liquid assets, stocks, bonds, properties, and controlling interest in Montoya Designs, LLC." He stopped. He deliberately paused, looking down at the page as if rereading a complex, unexpected clause. He was drawing out the moment. He was a master showman. "Come on," Nathan whispered, his voice a low hiss. "Come on." Harrison cleared his throat. "I decree the following. First, to my ex-husband, Julian Thorne." My head snapped up. Me. What was this A sound like a strangled gasp came from Nathan? He inhaled so sharply it sounded like he'd been punched in the stomach. His face, which had been pale with anticipation, went rigid. His eyes narrowed into tiny slits of pure, unadulterated hatred, and they were fixed laser-like on me. He wasn't breathing. He was just waiting. He was a bomb, and his fuse had just been lit. I could see the muscles in his jaw clenching and unclenching, grinding his expensive teeth. What in God's name was she doing? Was this her final cruelty, to give me some small insulting sum, a few $1,000s, just to rub his nose in it one last time before giving him the rest? Harrison continued, his voice perfectly, even betraying not a flicker of the drama he was unleashing. "To my ex-husband, Julian Thorne, I give and bequeath the sum of $15. $15. The words just hung there. It wasn't an insult. It was a public execution. It was a joke. A petty, cruel, and profoundly childish joke. But Harrison wasn't finished. He read the final part of the clause, the part that twisted the knife and locked it in place. $15 to be paid in cash. This is to cover the cost of the bus ride back to wherever it is he came from. A trip my son Nathan will surely be kind enough to suggest for him. It started as a snort, a choked, disbelieving sound. Then the dam of his self-control didn't just break, it evaporated. A laugh, a huge, roaring, braying laugh erupted from Nathan's chest. It was not a sound of humor. It was a sound of sheer, unadulterated triumph. It was a sound of such profound, malignant joy that it made the air in the cold room feel sick. He shot up from his chair, his body trembling with the force of his laughter. He pointed at me, his finger shaking his face, turning a dark, blotchy crimson. He was crying actual tears of malicious joy streaming down his cheeks. $15? He roared. The words bounced off the walls. $15. He doubled over, slapping his hand on the priceless mahogany table. Oh my God, $15. Kyle, who had been sitting in a stunned, humiliated silence, now seemed to catch the new current. He saw his path back into his patron's good graces. A slow, sickly smile spread across his face. Incredible, Nathan. Just incredible. Sophia, catching on, let out a high-pitched, sycophantic shriek of laughter. $15 for a bus. Oh, Nathan, she was hilarious. Wasn't she? Nathan howled, straightening up, wiping a tear from his eye. He was a performer, and he finally had his audience back. He looked at his two companions, his chest puffed with victory. She always had a wicked sense of humor, always. He had won. In his mind, the game was over. The insults to his friends were just appetizers. The confusion with the key was a meaningless tangent. This was the punchline. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He had been publicly, legally, and financially declared the victor. And I had been publicly, legally, and financially declared nothing, less than nothing. A $15 joke. His laughter finally simmering down into a low, smug chuckle. He adjusted the cuffs of his Tom Ford suit, a gesture of absolute restored control. He was the king again. He turned his gaze on me, and all traces of humor vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian satisfaction. A dark, evil smile played on his lips. "Well," he said, his voice dripping with false pity. "That's that, I suppose." He walked around the table, a predator circling its kill, and he stopped just a few feet away from me. He looked me up and down, his eyes filled with a disgust so profound it was almost tangible. "It's over, old man. You heard her. $15. He reached into his pocket, the one on his $10,000 suit, and pulled out a slim alligator skin wallet. He made a show of opening it, his movements slow and deliberate. "You know what?" he said, his voice a low, confidential sneer. 15 is a little insulting. Here." He pulled out a $20 bill and threw it on the table in front of me. The bill skittered across the polished wood and came to rest right in front of my hands. "There. 20. Don't say I never gave you anything." And he stared at me, daring me to react. Daring me to yell, to cry, to reach for the money. I did none of those things. I just sat there. I looked at the $20 bill. I looked at his smug, victorious face. And I waited. I didn't feel humiliated. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel sad. I just felt a deep, profound sense of anticipation. Because I knew Isabella, and I was watching Mr. Harrison. And Mr. Harrison was not moving. He was sitting at the head of the table, his face a perfect neutral mask, his hands resting on the document. He was letting the performance play out. This wasn't the end. This was the intermission. My stillness, my absolute lack of reaction, infuriated Nathan more than any outburst could have. His smile faltered. "What's the matter, old man?" he sneered. "Speechless cat got your tongue," he scoffed. "Whatever it's done, it's all mine. Finally, you can get the hell out of here now. Go back to your sawdust shed or whatever hole you crawled out of. And don't forget your bus money." He turned his back on me, a final act of dismissal. He walked back to his chair, clapping Kyle on the shoulder. "Right. Per se. We have a lot of champagne to drink." He grabbed his suit jacket, ready to leave, ready to start his new life. Nathan had his jacket halfway on. He was beaming, clapping Kyle on the back so hard, it was almost a punch. "Right," he said, his voice loud and booming. "Per se. I'm going to buy the entire champagne list. Harrison." He called over his shoulder, not even looking at the lawyer. "Just have your girl send the papers to my office for me to sign. I'm done here." He turned to leave a king departing his own coronation. "Mr. Thorne." The voice cut through the air like a sheet of ice. It wasn't loud, but it had a core of absolute steel. It stopped everyone. It stopped Nathan in his tracks, his jacket half on one foot, already turned toward the door. He turned back, his triumphant, laughing face slowly hardening. "What?" Mr. Harrison was still seated. He hadn't moved an inch. He was looking at Nathan, and his expression was no longer neutral. It was cold. "Please sit down." The smile on Nathan's face didn't just fade. It was wiped clean as if by a solvent. The blood drained from his face, leaving the blotchy red patches from his laughter, looking like burns. "What did you say?" He whispered, his voice suddenly hoarse. "I said." Harrison repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Sit down. I have not finished reading." "Finished," Nathan's voice cracked. "What are you talking about?" "You read it. $15. The joke. It's over. You're done." Mr. Harrison, with the slow, deliberate motion of a man revealing the winning card, reached down to his briefcase, which sat on the floor beside him. He did not touch the leather-bound will that was already on the table. He brought up a second, thinner folder. It was simple manila, but it was bound with a thick red wax seal. It looked important. That Mr. Harrison said, tapping the large leather binder on the table, was the conclusion of the original last will and testament. He then placed the new folder on the table. "This," he said, his voice dropping, "is a codicil, a legally binding addendum." He looked directly at Nathan, his eyes unblinking. "It was signed, witnessed, and notarized 3 weeks ago. 1 week before your mother's stroke." He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. "And its primary clause," he said, his eyes flicking to me for just a fraction of a second, "explicitly states that it supersedes and replaces all previous articles pertaining to the disposition of the primary estate." Nathan didn't just sit down. He collapsed back into his chair, his body moving like a puppet whose strings had been cut. His face was a mask of waxy white shock. The triumphant blotchy red was gone. He looked small. Kyle and Sophia were completely frozen. They looked at the new red-sealed document on the table as if it were a bomb. Mr. Harrison broke the seal with a small, sharp knife. He unfolded the single sheet of paper inside, which was attached to several other thicker documents. He put his reading glasses back on. "This," he said, and his voice was no longer neutral, "is a letter from your mother addressed to you, Nathan, but with the legal instruction that it be read aloud here today in the presence of all parties, and its contents form the basis of the new Article 8. He began to read, and it was no longer his voice. The words were pure, uncut Isabella. "To my son Nathan." Harrison paused, then continued. "I am writing this because I am finally done with being a coward. For 20 years I have let you believe a lie that I created, a lie that I nurtured, a lie that I allowed to destroy a good man, your father." "What?" Nathan whispered. It was a dry, rasping sound. "The story you grew up with." Harrison read, "The story of your criminal, scheming father who betrayed me and embezzled from the company is a complete fabrication, the opposite of the truth." "No!" Nathan's voice was a sudden, strangled shriek. He lunged halfway across the table, his eyes wild. She was sick. She was senile. That's not her. This is a fake. He pointed at me. He got to her. He manipulated her. This is a scam. He turned to his lawyer, Kyle, his eyes pleading. Kyle, tell him this is inadmissible. She wasn't competent. We'll contest this. We'll tear this apart. Mr. Harrison, looking profoundly bored, held up a hand to stop the tirade. He slowly lifted one of the other documents that had been in the sealed folder. On that subject, Harrison said, his voice cutting through Nathan's panic, attached to this codicil is a full 40-page psychiatric and cognitive evaluation of your mother, conducted by a panel of 3 independent board-certified neurologists and psychiatrists. It was performed at her request 72 hours before this document was signed. I will summarize their findings for you. He looked directly at Nathan, his eyes like ice. In their expert, unanimous, and legally binding opinion, your mother was, and I quote, entirely lucid, in full command of her faculties, and possessed of a mental acuity that was in fact superior to 99% of individuals in her age group. He dropped the report onto the table with a heavy thud. She was not, Mr. Thorne, insane. She was, as she states here, finally done. Now, if I may continue. Nathan sank back, his mouth open, making small, gulping sounds. He was out of moves. He was out of air. Harrison returned to Isabella's letter. His voice once again became the vessel for her confession. The truth, Nathan, is this. 20 years ago, Montoya Designs was on the brink of total catastrophic failure. I had made a series of terrible, reckless decisions. I had overextended. I had trusted the wrong people. I was facing not just bankruptcy, but criminal charges for fraud and negligence. I was going to lose everything: the house, the company, my name. I was going to prison. I closed my eyes. I was back there. In that dark office, her on the floor, weeping, begging. I felt the old, cold weight of that night settle on me. We were given one way out. Harrison read on. A deal with a group of unsavory investors. A deal that would save the company, but would require us to launder their money through its operations. I was trapped. If I said no, I went to prison for fraud. If I said yes, I would eventually go to prison for money laundering. I was a coward. I collapsed. I was ready to let the entire world burn. And then your father stepped in. I heard a small, choked sound from my left. It was Nathan. He was shaking his head, his hands over his ears, as if he could block the words. Your father, the man you have spent 20 years calling a criminal, made a choice. To protect me. To protect you. He took the deal. He put his own name, his own career, his own license on the line. He created the shell companies. He took the dark room meetings. He handled the wire transfers. He did the dirty work, so that my name, the Montoya name, could remain clean. Harrison's voice was relentless. He funneled all the risk to himself. He built a legal firewall around me, around the company, and he stood in the fire. And when the FBI finally came, they came for him, because that is exactly what he had planned. He confessed, Nathan. He confessed to crimes he didn't commit. Negligence, fraud. To cover up the real crime, the money laundering that I was responsible for. He lost his license. He lost his reputation. He lost his entire career. He did it to save me. To save the company that you now so arrogantly claim as your own. And what did I do? Harrison read his voice dropping. What did I do as my reward for this sacrifice? I listened to you. I listened to your poison. You told me he was a criminal. You told me he had humiliated us. And I, in my shame and in my cowardice, I agreed. I let that be the story. I divorced him. I abandoned him. I let you, our son, treat him like trash. Because I was terrified that if you ever knew the truth, you would look at me with the same contempt you had for him. I was a coward. Nathan and I let you become this. This greedy, arrogant, empty shell of a man who mocks the very person who sacrificed everything so you could have this life. The $160 million fortune you were so eager to claim. It exists for one reason and one reason only. It exists because your father, Julian Thorne, saved it. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a vacuum, heavy and suffocating. Harrison's voice reading Isabella's final words was the only thing that existed. He was no longer just a lawyer. He was the vessel for a confession that was rewriting 20 years of history in real time. Nathan was completely still. He wasn't shaking his head anymore. He wasn't covering his ears. He was just staring at the polished, empty surface of the table, his face a mask of waxy, corpse-like white. He looked like a man who had been told the world was ending, and he was the only one who hadn't known. Harrison continued, his voice steady, relentless. Your father, he read, is not a criminal. He is not a failure. He is a hero. The kind of man who makes a sacrifice so deep, so complete that people like you and me can't even comprehend it. He burned his own life to the ground to keep us warm, and I let you treat him like garbage. I encouraged you to treat him like garbage. I used your contempt for him as a shield to hide my own shame. Every time you mocked him, every time you called him a washed-up old man, it was one more stone on the wall I built to protect myself from the truth. The truth that I was the weak one, that I was the failure, that I was the one who had betrayed this family. My hands were shaking. I clasped them together on the table, my knuckles white. I could feel the hot sting of tears behind my eyes, a feeling I hadn't experienced in decades. It wasn't sadness. It was validation. A terrible, painful, 20 years too late validation. Harrison's voice pushed on each word, a hammer blow dismantling the entire foundation of my son's life. This $160 million fortune, he read, this empire you've been waiting to inherit like a spoiled prince. It does not exist because of you. It does not even exist because of me. It exists in its entirety because of Julian Thorne. You, Nathan. Isabella's words were now a direct, brutal assault. Have never worked a real day in your life. You have never built anything. You have never sacrificed anything. You are just a parasite, a creature of appetite. You have done nothing but spend money that you didn't earn, all while sitting in judgment of the one man who actually earned it for you. You are a consumer living off the scraps of his honor. The words landed. I saw them land. Nathan made a sound. It was a small, broken animal noise, a sound from deep in his chest. No. He whispered to the table. No, she didn't. She loved me. She no. He anymore. He wasn't angry, he was just hollow. The entire narrative of his life, his brilliant, infallible mother, his criminal, worthless father, his own status as the rightful heir, had been utterly, completely, and irrevocably incinerated in the space of 5 minutes. He slowly, mechanically slumped down in his chair. He didn't just sit back. He crumpled. His $10,000 suit, his armor of arrogance, suddenly looked 2 sizes too big for him. He looked like a child, a lost, broken, and terrified child. "No," he whispered again, his voice cracking. It's a lie." "She wouldn't." Harrison looked up from the page, his eyes cold. "She did, Mr. Thorne, and she had it all notarized." He turned the page, and now the conclusion. The room was no longer just a conference room. It was a courtroom. It was a confessional. It was a tomb. And now it was a stage for the final act. Nathan was a hollow shell slumped in his expensive suit. He was staring at this table, but I knew he wasn't seeing the polished wood. He was seeing the entire 20-year-long lie of his life, now exposed in the harsh fluorescent light. Kyle and Sophia were frozen, their own petty ambitions rendered completely irrelevant. They were just collateral damage in a war they never even knew was being fought. Mr. Harrison's voice, which had carried the weight of Isabella's confession, now shifted. It became harder, more formal. This was the judgment. This was the final legal and binding word. He turned the last page of the codicil. "Your mother's letter," he said, looking directly at Nathan, "serves as the legal and moral preamble to this, the final binding article of her last will and testament. It supersedes all that came before it. This is Article 8, the final disposition." He cleared his throat. He began to read. "Therefore," he read Isabella's final words, "having stated the unvarnished truth, and in an effort to correct insofar as money is able a betrayal that can never be undone." He paused. His eyes scanned the room, making sure he had the absolute undivided attention of every soul present. He did. The silence was so complete I could hear the tiny mechanical whir of the clock on the wall. "I hereby decree as my final wish and binding testament," he continued, his voice steady, "all of my property, real and personal, wherever situated, all of my stocks, bonds, and liquid assets, my art collection, my private holdings, and most importantly, my entire unencumbered 100% controlling interest in Montoya Designs, LLC, and all its subsidiaries, an estate with a current estimated value of $160 million. He read the list of assets like a judge reading a death sentence. It wasn't a prize. It was a weight, an empire, an impossible burden. Nathan didn't move. He didn't breathe. He was a statue of a man, his skin the color of ash. "All of this," Harrison read, "I give, devise, and bequeath." He stopped. He stopped, and he looked up. He didn't look at Nathan. He didn't look at Kyle or Sophia. His eyes, clear and steady behind his glasses, moved across the long, polished table. "And they found me." He held my gaze. In that 1 second of silence, my entire life seemed to hang in the balance. My workshop, my sawdust, my quiet, solitary peace. I wasn't thinking about money. I wasn't thinking about victory. I was thinking, what has she done? What final, terrible, complicated game was this? I was still reeling from the confession, from the validation that had been stolen from me for 2 decades. The money, the empire was a complication I couldn't even process. It was a different language. Mr. Harrison looked back down at the page. I give, devise, and bequeath to my ex-husband, Julian Thorne. The words didn't land. They just hung in the air. Julian Thorne. Me. The man in the 20-year-old suit. The man who had been summoned here for a public execution. I heard a sound. A small, wet, gasping sound. It was Nathan. But I couldn't look at him. I couldn't move. It felt as if the roof of the building had been removed and the entire crushing weight of the New York City sky was pressing down on my shoulders. $160 million. Montoya Designs. It wasn't a gift. It was a life sentence. It was a chain. It was her way of pulling me back from my quiet obscurity, back into the world of glass and steel and contracts and lies that I had run from. I could feel my heart pounding a slow, heavy drumbeat in my chest. Thump, thump, thump. Mr. Harrison, bless him, didn't let the moment hang. He didn't let anyone react. He knew that the next words were the most important. He knew the money was just a tool. The reason was the payload. He continued reading, his voice firm, projecting into the stunned, dead silence of the room. I leave this. He read not as a gift, but as a payment, as a long overdue and wholly inadequate compensation for the career I allowed to be destroyed, for the honor I allowed to be stolen, and for the family I in my cowardice allowed to be broken. And that was when it hit me. It wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about the reason. It was her final written, legally binding confession. It was her apology. It was her from beyond the grave handing me back my name, handing me back my honor. She wasn't just giving me her company. She was telling the world that it should have been mine all along, that I was the one who had saved it. I looked down at my hands, my rough, calloused carpenter's hands. They were resting on the polished, perfect wood. The hands of a man who built things, and I was now the owner of an empire I had never wanted. A small sound, a whimper, came from across the table. It was Nathan. He wasn't a monster anymore. He wasn't a king. He was just a boy. A 42-year-old boy whose entire life had just been revealed as a lie. A lie his mother had told him, and a lie his father had paid for. Kyle and Sophia were already ghosts. Their faces were blank, their minds unable to process this reality. They had hitched their wagons to a falling star, and now they were just irrelevant. I looked at Mr. Harrison. He was watching me. He was waiting. $160 million. The company. The penthouse, the watches. Isabella, my brilliant, impossible, destructive wife. Even in death, she had to have the last word. She had to control the entire narrative. She had exonerated me. She had made me whole. But in doing so, she had chained me to her legacy forever. She had given me everything, and in a way she had taken everything all over again. My simple life was over. My son Nathan was a ruin. He was a building that had been imploded. He sat there, his mouth half open, his eyes blank and unfocused, still trying to process the fact that the entire $160 had just vanished, and been handed to me, the man he despised more than anyone on earth. He was breathing in short, shallow gasps like a drowning man. Kyle and Sophia were completely adrift. Their golden goose hadn't just stopped laying eggs. It had exploded. I could see the panic in Kyle's eyes, the gears in his rat-like brain spinning, trying to find a new angle, a new con, and coming up with nothing. Sophia was just white. Her mask of makeup looked like a porcelain shell, and it was cracking. Harrison, the executor of this devastating will, was not finished. He still held the codicil. There was one last piece of business. And finally, Harrison said, his voice as unforgiving as a judge's gavel. "We come to the final bequest." He looked at my son. And for my son, Nathan Thorne, at the sound of his name, a tiny, pathetic flicker of something sparked in Nathan's dead eyes. It wasn't hope. It was more primal than that. It was the desperate animal instinct not to be left with absolutely nothing. He slowly, painfully raised his head, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow, fixed on Harrison. He was waiting for what $1 million trust fund. An allowance, some small scrap from the table he thought had been set for him. Mr. Harrison looked at him. There was no pity in his gaze. There was no emotion at all. It was just the final cold execution of his duty. "For my son Nathan," he read, "who has already received a lifetime's worth of fortune, both in the money he spent so freely and in the sacrifices he never acknowledged, I leave him only one thing." Harrison paused. He looked down at his paper, then back at Nathan. "I leave him precisely what he so thoughtfully and publicly offered to his father." I felt my breath catch. No. Nathan's confused, broken gaze shifted to me, then back to Harrison. He didn't understand. He couldn't make the connection. His mind was too shattered. I don't, he stammered. What Mr. Harrison did not reply. Instead, with a slow, deliberate motion, he reached to the side of his desk. He opened a single drawer. His hand went inside and emerged holding one item. A check. A single bank-certified cashier's check. Mr. Harrison, on behalf of the estate, he said, was authorized to prepare this in accordance with your mother's wishes. He held it up for a moment. Then he placed it on the polished mahogany table. He slid it across the vast expanse of wood. It skidded, making a small whispering sound, and came to a stop directly in front of Nathan. $15, Harrison said. His voice was flat. Final. Your inheritance, Mr. Thorne, as your mother specified, for your bus fare. Kyle the shark. The financial advisor said nothing. He didn't make a sound. He just stood up. Quietly, smoothly, he pushed his chair in. He didn't look at Nathan. He didn't look at me. He just evaporated. He gathered his own briefcase and walked quickly and silently out of the conference room. He was gone. Sophia, on the other hand, was not silent. She looked at the check. She looked at Nathan's broken, pathetic face. And her expression, which had been one of shock, curdled into something else. It was pure, unadulterated disgust. The revulsion of a predator for a mate who had suddenly become weak. The man she had attached herself to, the source of the Birkin bags and the Park Avenue life, was nothing. He was a $15 man. You, she hissed, her voice low and full of venom. You're pathetic. She stood up, grabbed her own expensive purse, the real one, and without a single look back, she too walked out of the room so fast. The click-clack of her high heels on the marble floor outside was the only sound. And then there were three. The check. The $15 check. It sat on the polished wood, a final brutal monument to my son's arrogance. Nathan stared at it. His breathing, which had been shallow and gasping, just stopped. For a full 5 seconds, he was completely motionless. He was a statue of ruin. I could see the tiny muscles in his cheek twitching, the only sign of life. And then he exploded. It wasn't a word. It was a scream. A primal, guttural roar of such pure, undiluted rage that it felt like a physical blow. It was the sound of a man who had not just lost everything, but who had just realized in one horrifying instant that he was nothing. No. His arms flew out, sweeping the table. Glasses, notepads, the heavy water carafe, everything went flying. The crystal shattered against the mahogany wall. "I'll sue you," he shrieked, his voice cracking, spittle flying from his lips. He wasn't talking to Harrison. He was screaming at the universe, at his dead mother. "I'll sue all of you." She was crazy. She was senile. I'll prove it. I'll burn it all to the ground. He spun, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, his eyes wild and bloodshot. And then his gaze landed on me. All of his rage, all of his humiliation, all of his pain focused into one single burning point of hatred. "You," he bellowed. "This was you. You did this. You got to her. You manipulated her. You thief." And with that, he lunged. He didn't just walk. He launched himself across the room, his chair crashing to the floor behind him. He wasn't a businessman anymore. He was just an animal blind with fury. His hands were curled into claws, and he was coming right for my throat. I didn't even have time to stand. I just braced myself, but Harrison was faster. His hand, which had been resting calmly on the desk, moved with lightning speed to a small black intercom button. He pressed it. Once. Before Nathan could even get halfway around the massive table, the conference room doors burst open. Not one, but 2 security guards filled the doorway. These were not the mall cop types. These were men who were built like refrigerators, professionals in dark suits with earpieces. The kind of men who protect billionaires and presidents. Nathan, blinded by his own rage, didn't even see them until they had him. One guard grabbed his left arm, the other grabbed his right. They spun him around his $1,000 suit jacket, ripping at the seam, and pinned his arms behind his back with brutal, practiced efficiency. "Get your hands off me!" he screamed, his voice a pathetic mix of fury and panic. He struggled, thrashing against their grip, but it was like a fly struggling against steel. Mr. Harrison stood up slowly. He looked at the wreckage of his conference room. He looked at the struggling, weeping, screaming man held captive by his security. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Remove him," he said, his voice flat and cold. "You can't do this to me," Nathan shrieked as they began to drag him backward out of the room. "I am Nathan Thorne. I own this building. I'll have your jobs. I'll end Mr. Thorne," Harrison added, his voice cutting through the tantrum. Nathan froze, his head twisting around his eyes, still wild. Harrison pointed to the small white check still sitting innocently on the table. "Don't forget your inheritance." That broke him. The last shred of his sanity snapped. He began to curse. He cursed Harrison. He cursed his mother. But most of all, he cursed me. "I'll kill you, old man. Do you hear me? I'll kill you." He was still screaming, still fighting as they dragged him out into the hallway and toward the elevators, his expensive shoes scuffing pathetically on the marble floor. The heavy oak doors swung shut, and he was gone. The heavy oak doors clicked shut. The silence that rushed in to fill the vacuum of Nathan's rage was profound. It was a thick, heavy quiet, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the distant, muffled wail of a siren in the city far below. The adrenaline that had been holding me upright, the shock of the last hour, all of it drained away at once. I felt tired in a way that went bone deep. 20 years of exhaustion seemed to land on me all at once. I slumped in my chair, the old wool of my suit suddenly feeling heavy as armor. There were only two of us left, me, the man who now owned everything, and Mr. Harrison, the man who had delivered the verdict. I looked at the chaos, the overturned chair, the shattered glass, the $20 bill that Nathan had thrown at me still sitting on the table next to the $15 check. I looked at Harrison. He was calmly straightening the documents, his face once again a neutral mask, as if a Category 5 hurricane hadn't just torn through his office. Only one question remained, the one loose thread. "The key," I said, my voice hoarse, "the watches. Why did she do that? Why involve me? In that it was cruel." Mr. Harrison stopped shuffling his papers. He looked up at me, and for the first time that day, a genuine human smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was a small, sad, knowing smile. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice softening, "that was your wife's final test for her son. A test. He failed spectacularly. She wanted to see if he would even for a moment be willing to humble himself and ask you for something, to see if there was any part of him left that could be redeemed." He shook his head. "And it was a message for you." He reached into his breast pocket, the one he had taken his glasses from. He pulled out something small. It wasn't the thick leather binder or the sealed codicil. It was a key. A single old-fashioned small brass key. A house key. He slid it across the table. It made a small metallic tink as it stopped near my hand. "That, he said, "is the key she left for you. It was never about the watches. That part was just theater, a way to set the stage." I stared at the small, simple object. "Then what is this for?" "It's the key to the penthouse," Harrison said. "But the safe inside, the one she mentioned, it doesn't contain any watches. Nathan will have it drilled open, and he will find nothing but empty velvet boxes. Another final joke, I suppose." "So what's in it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What is this key really for?" Harrison leaned forward. "There is another safe, Mr. Thorne. A wall safe, hidden behind a painting in her private study. This is the key to that safe." He paused, letting the weight of his next words land. "In it," he said, "is the original evidence. Everything. The complete, unredacted 2005 file. All the original wire transfers. All the shell company documents you signed. And most importantly, all the emails and letters she sent you begging you to do it." My heart stopped. "She kept it all," Harrison said quietly. "She kept the entire unvarnished truth locked away for 20 years. The confession she wrote, it's all supported by this. She wanted you to be the one to find it. She wanted you to be the one to decide whether to make it public or not. The money that was her apology, but this, he nodded at the key. This was her giving you back your name. I reached out my hand, my rough, calloused fingers closing around the small, cool piece of brass. The $160 million. That was a weight. It was a burden. A new prison. But this key, this was freedom. Here is the lesson and call to action to be added at the end of the story. This whole experience taught me a powerful lesson. The truth I've learned has a weight and a patience all its own. For 20 years, a lie poisoned an entire family, turning a son against the father who had secretly saved him. But a lie built on silence and shame cannot last forever. Isabella's final confession showed me that no matter how deeply it is buried, the truth will eventually claw its way to the surface. It proved that true honor is not about reputation, but about the silent, thankless sacrifices you make. In the end, a name cleared by truth is an inheritance worth far more than any fortune. What would you have done with the key and that $160 million burden? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Story 2. My name is Robert. I'm 64 years old. And the day my son Michael gave me a cruise as a gift to relax, I should have known there was something terrible behind that smile. But when I came back home to get my blood pressure medication, that I'd forgotten, I heard Michael talking on the phone with his wife Claire. The words coming out of his mouth froze my blood. Don't worry, honey. It's a one-way ticket. When he's out at sea, it'll be easy to make it look like an accident. Nobody will suspect an old man who simply fell overboard. At that moment, standing behind the door of my own house, I took a deep breath and thought, if that's how you want it, my dear son, have it your way. But you're going to regret it 3 times over. Because my only son, the boy I raised with so much love, had just made the worst mistake of his life. If Michael thought his father was a helpless old man, he was about to discover how wrong he was. A man my age who's fought his whole life, who raised children, lost his wife, survived betrayals and disappointments, doesn't give up easily. If he wanted to play dirty, I was going to show him how it's really done. But first, I needed to understand why my own son wanted to see me dead. Everything had started 3 days earlier. When Michael arrived at my house with that radiant smile I hadn't seen in years, he was carrying a golden envelope in his hands, the kind that fancy travel agencies use. "Dad," he said to me, hugging me with strange euphoria, "I have a wonderful surprise for you. You've worked so hard your whole life, sacrificed so much for us, that Claire and I decided to give you a special gift." When I opened the envelope and saw the cruise tickets, my eyes filled with tears. A Caribbean cruise, 7 days sailing through crystal waters, visiting paradise islands like the Bahamas and Turks and Chaos. It was the trip of my dreams that I'd always postponed because the money was needed for other things. Michael's education, household expenses, family emergencies. "Son, this must have cost a fortune," I said, looking at the first-class tickets. "Dad, your happiness is priceless," Michael replied with that soft voice that always melted my heart. "You deserve this and much more. Besides, you need to relax, get away from the stress of the city, breathe the pure sea air." In 64 years of life, I've learned to trust my instincts. And something in the way Michael looked at me, something in the way his eyes didn't meet mine, told me there was more than he was willing to tell. But he was my son, my only son, the baby I carried in my arms through entire nights when he had a fever, the boy I taught to walk, the teenager I supported in every important life decision. When do I leave? I asked, feigning an emotion I no longer completely felt. Day after tomorrow. Dad, everything's already arranged. You just need to arrive at the port with your luggage. Claire took care of all the details. That night, while packing my suitcase, I couldn't shake a strange feeling. Michael had been very distant in recent months, visiting me less, barely calling, and suddenly this generous, unexpected gift. I concluded it was my old man's paranoia making me doubt my son's good intentions. After all, maybe he'd really realized how much I'd sacrificed for him and finally wanted to give back some of that generosity. On departure day, I got up early, finished packing my things, and when I was ready to leave, I realized I'd forgotten my blood pressure medication in the bathroom cabinet. I went back home, opened the door carefully, not to make noise, and that's when I heard Michael's voice talking on the phone in the living room. Yes, Claire. He's already left for the port. No, he doesn't suspect anything. The plan is going perfectly. His voice sounded cold, calculating, completely different from the caring voice he used with me. I stood motionless behind the door, feeling like the floor was opening beneath my feet. Dad's life insurance is for $200,000, Michael continued. And with the inheritance from the house, that's at least another $300,000. Enough to pay all my debts and start over. My heart stopped. My own son was talking about my death like it was a business, a cold, calculated transaction. Don't worry, honey. A man his age at sea. These things happen. Nobody's going to ask uncomfortable questions and will be the perfect mourers. The children devastated by the loss. Tears ran down my face, but not from sadness. It was a mixture of anger, disappointment, and a determination I hadn't felt in years. At that moment, I understood I'd raised a monster, and if I wanted to survive, I'd have to be smarter than him. I left the house in silence, pretending I hadn't heard anything. But my mind was already working at full speed. I had to get to the port. I had to board that ship. But now I knew that every step I took brought me closer to danger. During the entire taxi ride, as I watched my city's streets pass by the window, I couldn't stop thinking about how it had come to this point. I, Robert Sullivan, had dedicated my entire life to being the perfect father. I married young at 20 to Michael's mother. I worked as an accountant in a small firm for 15 years, saving every penny I earned to give my family the best life possible. When my wife died of cancer, Michael was only 12 years old, and I decided that my life's only priority would be ensuring he had everything he needed. I left my job to take care of him full-time. I sold my car, pawned my watch collection, used all my savings to pay for the most expensive college in the city, Columbia University. While other fathers my age went out with friends, traveled, had fun, I stayed home doing freelance accounting work to have extra money for Michael's expenses. I never complained, never charged him for anything. I thought I was raising a good man, someone who would value everything his father had done for him. How foolish I was. When Michael married Claire 5 years ago, I was so happy. I thought I'd finally have the family I'd always dreamed of, that I'd have a daughter-in-law, grandchildren, family gatherings full of love. But Claire never liked me. From the first day, I saw in her eyes the contempt that some women feel for their father's in-law, as if I were a nuisance in their perfect marriage. And Michael, my dear Michael, began to change. Visits became less frequent, calls shorter, excuses more elaborate. When I asked about his work, he gave me vague answers. When I asked about his plans, he changed the subject. Now, sitting in the back of that taxi, I understood there had been signs everywhere, and I'd chosen to ignore them. Like that time 6 months ago, when I arrived at his house unannounced and found Michael arguing heatedly on the phone about money. He got nervous when he saw me, hung up quickly, and told me it was a small problem at work. Or like the time I heard Claire telling a friend that if her father-in-law didn't live so close, they'd have more space. When I mentioned this to Michael, he said I'd misunderstood that Claire really liked me. But sometimes women said things they didn't really mean. I always found excuses to defend them, to justify their behavior, to convince myself my imagination was playing tricks on me. But now, with the truth hitting me like a slap, I understood that my son had been planning this for a long time. It wasn't an impulsive decision. It was a calculated, thought-out, elaborate plan with the coldness of a professional killer. The taxi stopped in front of the port. The cruise ship was imposing a white giant of 12 stories that rose toward the sky like a floating building. There were hundreds of people boarding with their suitcases, entire families excited for vacation, couples taking photos, children running back and forth. All of them would enjoy 7 wonderful days at sea. I, according to my son's plan, wouldn't come back alive. But as I dragged my suitcase toward the ship's entrance, a smile began to form on my lips. Michael had made a terrible mistake by underestimating me. He'd made the mistake of believing his father was a foolish, defenseless old man. What he didn't know was that during all those years of silence, sacrifice, apparent submission, I'd been observing, learning, storing information. I wasn't the naive man he thought. When I handed over my documentation to board, the attendant smiled at me with that professional cordiality they use with all passengers. "Mr. Sullivan, how exciting. Your first time on a cruise, isn't it?" "Yes," I replied, keeping my voice sweet and fragile, that everyone expected from a man my age. My son gave me this trip as a gift. He said I need to relax. "What a thoughtful son," the attendant commented while checking my documents. "He's certainly going to miss you a lot during these 7 days. If she only knew," I thought to myself, if she only knew that his plan was for these to be the last 7 days of my life. But as I climbed the ramp toward the ship's interior, I was already formulating my own strategy. I had 7 days to transform from victim to hunter. 7 days to gather the evidence I needed. 7 days to prepare the surprise I had in store for Michael. My cabin was on the 8th floor with a sea view. It was beautiful, elegant, with a comfortable bed and a small private balcony. Michael had paid for the best, probably thinking it was easier to make someone disappear from a balcony than from inside the ship. I left my suitcase on the bed and sat for a moment to think. I needed a plan, allies, and above all, evidence. Because knowing the truth was one thing. Being able to prove it was something very different. I picked up my cell phone and dialed a number I'd saved months ago but never used. It was the number of Frank Harrison, a private detective I'd met when a neighbor had problems with her ex-husband. He'd given me his business card saying that if I ever needed help, I shouldn't hesitate to call him. Detective Harrison. A deep voice answered after 3 rings. "Hello, this is Robert Sullivan. We met a few months ago at the Hope Community Center, the neighbor who had a problem. I don't know if you remember me." "Of course I remember, Mr. Sullivan. How can I help you?" I took a deep breath before continuing. I need to hire you for a very delicate case. My son is trying to kill me." There was silence on the other end of the line. He probably thought I was a paranoid old man with trivial family problems. "Mr. Sullivan, are you sure about what you're saying? These are very serious accusations. I'm absolutely certain. I heard my son planning my death. I'm on a cruise right now, and he believes this will be just a one-way trip for me. I need you to investigate his finances, his debts, everything you can find. And I need you to help me gather evidence of what he's planning. Where are you on the Star of the Sea ship, which departs in half an hour toward the Caribbean islands? I'll be out of contact for 7 days, but when I return, I need to have as much information as possible about my son, Michael Sullivan. Understood. I'll send you my bank account by text message for you to transfer $500 as an advance. And Mr. Sullivan, tell me one thing. Be very careful. If what you're telling me is true, you're in real danger. Don't do anything that could put your safety at risk. Detective, I've lived in this world for 64 years. I've survived poverty, widowhood, raising a son alone, sacrificing my entire life for other people. Believe me, I'm not going to let my own son defeat me. Now, after hanging up with Detective Harrison, I sat in my cabin feeling a strange mixture of fear and determination. The ship had begun to move smoothly, moving away from the port, and I knew that every mile that separated us from the coast brought me closer to the moment when Michael expected his plan to be executed. But there was something Michael didn't know about his father. I wasn't the fragile man he thought. During all these years of apparent submission, I'd been observing, learning, keeping secrets that neither he nor Claire imagined. I decided the first thing I had to do was explore the ship, know every corner, every exit, every place where someone could try to hurt me. If they were going to try to simulate an accident, I needed to be prepared for any situation. I left my cabin and began walking through the cruise ship's corridors. It was impressive. Elegant restaurants, casinos, shops, a gigantic pool on the upper deck, theaters, libraries. It was like a floating city full of life and joy. But I wasn't there to have fun. I was there to survive. As I walked, I observed the security cameras. There were many in practically every corridor in every public area. That calmed me down a bit. It would be difficult to make someone disappear in such a monitored place without raising suspicions. However, I also noticed that the private cabin balconies had no cameras, and my cabin had one of those balconies. Michael had been very clever in choosing that specific room. In the main restaurant, while having lunch alone at a table near the window, I began observing the other passengers. Most were families on vacation, older couples, celebrating anniversaries, groups of friends having fun. Everyone seemed innocent, normal, happy. That's when I saw him. A man approximately my age sitting alone at a nearby table reading a book while eating. He had silver hair, perfectly styled, and wore an elegant blue suit. Something in his posture told me he was a strong, independent man. Our eyes met by chance, and he smiled at me with that cordiality that only people of our generation know how to share. I decided to approach. "Excuse me," I said timidly. "Would you mind if I sat with you? I hate eating alone. Please sit down." He responded with a warm voice and a slight accent I couldn't identify. "I'm Carl Anderson from Denver, and you, Robert Sullivan from Chicago. It's a pleasure to meet you, Carl." As we talked during lunch, I discovered that Carl had a story similar to mine in many ways. He was a widower, had raised children alone, had worked his entire life, and now for the first time in decades, was doing something just for himself. My children insisted so much that I take this vacation, he told me while drinking his coffee. They said it was time for me to relax, to enjoy life. At first I resisted, but finally gave in. Same as me, I replied, feeling an immediate connection with this man. My son Michael gave me this cruise as a gift. He says I need to get away from the stress of the city. Something in the way Carl looked at me made me feel I could trust him. There was an intelligence in his eyes, a wisdom that only comes with the experience of having lived a lot and having learned to read people. Robert, he said to me, lowering his voice, can I ask you a personal question? You seem worried, tense. That's not the typical attitude of someone on a dream trip. For a moment, I considered telling him everything, but then I remembered Detective Harrison's words about putting my safety at risk. I decided to be cautious. It's just that, well, this is my first time on a cruise. Everything is so new, so different. I guess I'm a little nervous. Carl nodded understandingly, but I could see in his eyes that he didn't completely believe me. This man had experience reading between the lines. Look, Robert, he said to me, leaning slightly in my direction. We don't know each other, but I've lived for 62 years. And I've learned to recognize when a man is in trouble. If you need to talk to someone, or if you need help with anything, please don't hesitate to find me. My cabin is 1247 on the 12th floor. I felt a warmth in my chest that I hadn't felt in months. Here was a complete stranger offering me more genuine support than I'd received from my own son in years. Thank you, Carl. Really, and your cabin is very close to mine. Mine is 847 on the 8th floor. Perfect. Then we'll be ship neighbors. After lunch, I decided to explore more of the cruise. I went to the library where I found computers with internet access. It was limited and expensive, but I could send short messages. I sat in front of one of the computers and wrote a quick email to Detective Harrison. I'm fine. Especially investigate Michael's gambling debts. I think that's the key to everything. I have a new ally on the ship. I'll keep in touch when I can. Robert. Next, I went to the ship's casino not to gamble, but to observe. I wanted to understand how the world of betting worked, what kind of debt someone could accumulate, how people got so desperate for money that they'd consider murder as an option. I saw men and women betting large amounts with the naturalness of someone buying a magazine. I saw the excitement on their faces when they won and the despair when they lost. I saw how some gamblers seemed to be in a downward spiral, betting more and more money in a desperate attempt to recover what they'd lost. And then I understood Michael wasn't just an ungrateful son. He was a desperate man, probably with huge debts, who saw his father's death as the only solution to his financial problems. That night, while dining in the main restaurant, I ran into Carl again. This time he approached my table without me inviting him. Robert, he said to me, sitting in front of me. I've been thinking about our conversation this afternoon, and I need to tell you something. You don't look like a man on vacation. You look like a man who's running from something or planning something. I remained silent for a moment, evaluating how much I could reveal to him. Carl, I finally said, have you ever discovered that someone you love deeply betrayed you in the worst possible way? His eyes softened, and I saw in them a glimmer of recognition. Yes, he answered simply. My business partner. I discovered he'd been embezzling money from our company for years, almost led us to bankruptcy. What did you do? What I had to do, I gathered all the evidence, confronted him, and made sure he paid for what he'd done. But Robert, we're talking about your son. I took a deep breath. Carl had already shown he could keep difficult family secrets, and I needed an ally, someone to trust during these crucial 7 days. Carl, I said, looking directly into his eyes, my son is trying to kill me, and I have 7 days to stop him and prove what he's planning. The expression on Carl's face changed immediately. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't disbelief. It was the look of a man who'd lived long enough to know that families can hide the darkest secrets. Robert, he said to me, lowering his voice to the point of becoming a whisper, tell me everything from the beginning. For the next 40 minutes, I told Carl the whole story. I talked about the cruise gift, about the phone conversation. I'd heard about the gambling debts I suspected Michael had, about the life insurance and inheritance he expected to receive after my death. Carl listened to me without interrupting even once. When I finished, he remained silent for a few minutes, processing all the information. Robert, he finally said, this is very serious. You're in real danger, but it also seems to me that you already have a plan. I'm starting to, I replied. I've hired a private detective to investigate Michael's finances, but I need more than that. I need concrete evidence of his intentions. I need witnesses. I need evidence that a judge can't ignore. And how do you think you'll get all that while you're on this ship? That's where I need your help, Carl. Michael is going to try to communicate with me during the trip. He's going to call me, send me messages, pretending to be the concerned son. Each of those conversations will be an opportunity for him to betray himself. Carl nodded slowly, beginning to understand where my plan was going. You want to record, he said. Exactly. But I can't do it alone. I need witnesses. I need someone who can confirm what I'm documenting, someone without emotional connection to Michael, someone credible. Count on me, Carl replied without hesitation. But Robert, there's something else we should consider. If Michael is really planning to simulate an accident on this ship, it's possible there's someone else involved, someone on the cruise who's working with him. That possibility hadn't occurred to me, and it chilled my blood. You think Michael could have bribed someone from the ship's crew? It's possible. Or he could have hired someone to pose as a passenger. Robert, you need to be very alert in the coming days. Don't trust anyone except me. Don't accept drinks from strangers. Don't be alone in isolated places, especially on your balcony. I'd already thought about the balcony. It's a very convenient place, very private. Exactly. Look, I have a proposal. Why don't you spend the nights in my cabin? I have a suite with a sofa bed. That way we'll be together, and if someone comes looking for you in your room, they won't find you. Carl's generosity moved me deeply. This man who'd met me just hours ago was willing to risk his own safety to help me. Carl, I can't ask you to do that. If Michael really has someone on this ship, Robert. Carl interrupted me firmly. I'm 62 years old. I raised 4 children and buried a wife. I ran my own company for 30 years. I'm not afraid of a spoiled brat who wants to kill his father for money. Besides, he added with a mischievous smile, it's been a long time since I've had an exciting adventure. That night after dinner, Carl helped me take some of my essential things to his cabin. It was much larger than mine, with the living room separate from the bedroom and a wider balcony. But most importantly, it had 2 beds which allowed us to watch over each other. While we organized my things, Carl asked me detailed questions about Michael, about his personality, his habits, his relationship with Claire. Tell me, Robert, was Michael always manipulative, or is this something new? He was always very clever, I replied, thinking carefully. Since he was little, he knew exactly what to say to get what he wanted. But I thought it was normal childhood cunning. I never imagined it could turn into this. And Claire, what's the relationship between them like? At first, they seemed very much in love, but in recent years, I've noticed tension. Claire is always complaining about money, that they need a bigger house, more expensive vacations, a better car. And Michael always promises that things will get better, that he'll get more money. Now we know where that money would come from, Carl commented darkly. Around 10 at night, my phone rang. It was Michael. Carl and I looked at each other. The moment had come to put our plan into practice. Remember, Carl whispered while preparing his own phone to record. Make him talk. Make him betray himself. I took a deep breath and answered. Hello, son. Hi, Dad. How's the cruise? Are you having fun? His voice sounded perfectly normal, caring, concerned. If I hadn't heard his conversation with Claire, I would have believed he really cared about me. It's beautiful, son. The ship is amazing. My cabin is very comfortable. Thank you so much for this generous gift. You're welcome, Dad. You deserve it. Have you met new people? Are you making friends? An interesting question. Why did it matter to him if I was making friends? I met a very kind gentleman, Carl. We're eating together. There was an almost imperceptible pause before Michael responded. That's good, Dad. It's important that you're not alone. But also be careful. On these cruises, sometimes there are people who take advantage of older passengers. Carl looked at me with wide eyes. Michael had just sown doubt about anyone who could be my ally. Don't worry, son. I'm very cautious. But tell me, how are things there? How's Claire? Everything's fine, Dad. Claire sends you a hug. She said she hopes you're having a lot of fun and that you relax completely. How kind of her. Michael, can I ask you something? Of course, Dad. Whatever you want. Why did you decide to give me this trip as a gift now? I mean, it was so sudden, so unexpected. Another pause, this time longer. Well, Claire and I have been talking a lot about you lately. We realized you seem very tired, very stressed, and we thought you needed a break to get away from everything for a while. Get away from everything, I repeated, looking at Carl, who was writing down every word. Yes, Dad. Sometimes we need to completely disconnect from routine, don't we? I suppose so. Michael, can I confess something to you? Of course, Dad. At first, I felt a little guilty about accepting such an expensive gift. It must have cost a lot of money. Dad, please don't worry about that. Money isn't a problem. Besides, it's an investment in your well-being, and that's priceless. Carl wrote on a piece of paper and showed it to me. Ask about the return. Michael, a silly question. Do you have a copy of my return ticket? Because I checked my documents and only found the one-way ticket. The silence that followed was deafening. It lasted so long that for a moment I thought the call had dropped. Michael, are you there? Yes. Yes, Dad. Sorry. Claire was telling me something about the tickets. Don't worry, the travel agency has everything organized. You just need to enjoy the trip, and we'll take care of the details. But Michael, I want to be sure I can come back. Could you check with the agency tomorrow and confirm for me, Dad? Please trust me. Everything is perfectly organized. You don't have anything to worry about. Just relax and enjoy. That's the goal of the trip. Okay, son. I trust you completely. Perfect, Dad. I love you very much, sweet dreams. I love you too, Michael. Good night. When I hung up, Carl and I remained silent for a few minutes, processing what we just heard. Robert Carl said finally, "That conversation was very revealing. The way he avoided the question about the return ticket, the way he reassured you, saying not to worry about anything. It's like he's trying to keep you in a state of false security. And the question about whether I was making friends," I added. "It's like he was evaluating if I had allies, if there was someone who would notice if something happened to me." Exactly. Robert, tomorrow we need to go to the ship's office and personally verify the status of your return ticket. I want to see with my own eyes what Michael really booked. The next morning, Carl and I woke up early with a clear mission. After having breakfast in his cabin to avoid unnecessarily exposing me to public restaurants, we went directly to the passenger service office on the 3rd floor of the ship. The office was an elegant space with several desks staffed by uniformed employees. We approached a young woman named Patricia, according to her badge, who received us with a professional smile. "Good morning, gentlemen. How can I help you?" "Good morning," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "I need to verify my complete travel itinerary. My name is Robert Sullivan, cabin 847. Patricia typed quickly on her computer and frowned slightly. "Mr. Sullivan, I see here that you have the 7-day cruise booked along the Caribbean, but She stopped looking at the screen with confusion. But what Carl asked, noticing the hesitation in the employee's voice. "It's a bit strange. I see you have a one-way ticket, but no reservation appears for the return flight to Chicago. Normally, our packages include complete round-trip transportation." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, even knowing the truth. Hearing the official confirmation hurt deeply. "What does that mean exactly?" Carl asked, pretending to be as confused as I was. "Well, it means that when the cruise ends in 7 days, you have no way to get home. It could be a system error. Or maybe whoever bought the package thought about adding the return flight later." "Who bought this package?" I asked. Even though I already knew the answer, Patricia reviewed the information again. "Here it says it was purchased by Michael Sullivan with a credit card in his name. Is he your relative?" "He's my son," I replied, feeling a mixture of sadness and anger. "Oh well, then surely he'll take care of buying your return ticket. But Mr. Sullivan, I recommend you communicate with him soon, because flights from Miami to Chicago tend to fill up quickly, especially at this time of year." Carl and I looked at each other significantly. Patricia Carl intervened. "Would it be possible for Mr. Sullivan to buy his return ticket right now to be sure he'll have a seat?" "Of course." "Let me check availability," Patricia typed for several minutes. "I have availability on a flight leaving Saturday at 3:00 p.m. the day the cruise ends. The cost would be $750. "I want it," I said immediately, pulling out my credit card. While Patricia processed the purchase, Carl whispered in my ear, "Robert, we just got our first piece of evidence. Michael deliberately didn't buy your return ticket. That shows premeditated intent." When we left the office, we decided to walk on the ship's deck to talk privately. The day was beautiful with bright sun and a gentle breeze, but I couldn't enjoy anything knowing what I knew. "Carl," I said, as we walked near the railing, "every piece of evidence we find hurts me more. It's like discovering over and over that my own son wants to see me dead." I know, Robert, but every piece of evidence we find also protects you more. Look what we just did. Now you have your return ticket, and we have documented evidence that Michael never intended for you to come back alive. At that moment, my phone rang. It was a text message from Michael. Good morning, Dad. How did you wake up? Did you sleep well in your cabin? I showed the message to Carl. He's checking if you're in your cabin, he told me. He probably expected you to answer from there. I decided to test something. I replied, Good morning, son. I slept very well. I'm on the deck sunbathing. The ship is wonderful. The response came almost immediately. That's good, Dad. Enjoy a lot. Have you explored the whole ship yet? Another strange question. Why did he care how much I'd explored the ship, but I haven't explored everything yet? It's very big. Yesterday I got to know the restaurants and the casino. Today I want to see the pool and maybe the spa. Perfect, Dad. Just be careful near the railings. Sometimes people get seasick with the ship's movement and can lose their balance. Carl read the message over my shoulder, and his face went pale. Robert, he whispered. He just suggested how you're going to die. An accident near the railings. I know, I replied, feeling a chill despite the sun's heat. He's planting the idea, preparing the ground for when the news reaches shore. I replied to Michael, Don't worry, son. I'm very careful. I always stay away from the edges. That's what I hope, Dad. I love you very much and want you to come back safe and sound. What irony, Michael, talking about wanting me to come back safe and sound when he himself had planned for me to never return. During the rest of the day, Carl and I elaborated our plan in more detail. We decided we needed more evidence, more recordings, more proof of Michael's true intentions. We also determined it was crucial to identify if there was someone else on the ship working with him. Carl suggested we pay attention to any crew member who showed special interest in me or any passenger who seemed to be watching me. That afternoon, while we were at the pool, I noticed a man approximately 40 years old was watching us from the bar. He was wearing a green shirt and long pants, which was strange for being next to a pool. Every time I looked at him, he quickly looked away. Carl, I whispered. That man at the bar, the one in the green shirt. Notice he's watching us. Do. Carl turned discreetly to look at him. Yes, I see. And you're right. His behavior is suspicious. Let's do a test. Carl got up and walked to the other side of the pool as if going to the bathroom. I stayed in my place watching the man. Indeed, his eyes followed me the whole time, completely ignoring Carl. When he came back, he confirmed what I already knew. Robert, that man is definitely watching you specifically. When I left, he didn't pay me any attention. His eyes were fixed on you. What do we do? Let's be very clever. Get up and walk toward the elevator. I'll stay here and watch if he follows you. I did exactly what Carl suggested. I got up slowly, gathered my things, and walked toward the elevator. When the doors opened, I looked back discreetly. The man in the green shirt had gotten up from his place at the bar and was walking in my direction. I quickly entered the elevator and pressed the button for the 12th floor where Carl's cabin was. When the doors closed, I felt temporary relief, but also terrifying confirmation. Michael definitely had someone watching me on the ship. 15 minutes later, Carl arrived at the cabin. Robert, you're right. That man followed you to the elevator. When he saw you'd gone up, he also took the next elevator. He's definitely suspicious. What do we do now? If Michael has someone here, I'm in real danger. We're going to be smarter than them, Carl replied with determination. Tomorrow we're going to confront that man, but in a safe way. We're going to make him betray himself just like we're doing with Michael. That night, while we had dinner in Carl's cabin to avoid exposing ourselves in public restaurants, my phone rang again. This time, it was Claire. Hi, Robert. How are you? It's Claire. How's the cruise? It was the first time in months that Claire had called me directly. Her voice sounded forkily cheerful. Hello, Claire. What a surprise to hear from you. The cruise is beautiful. Thank you very much. That's good. Robert Michael told me you talked yesterday and that you're very happy. That gives us a lot of peace of mind. Carl activated the recording on his phone. Yes, I'm having a lot of fun. Although I have a question, Claire. Yesterday I went to the cruise office and they told me I don't have a return ticket. Do you know anything about that? There was a long pause before Claire responded. Oh, Robert, how strange. Michael took care of all the details. Maybe there was an error in the system. But don't worry, we'll take care of solving it. Are you sure? Because I already bought my own ticket to be calm. Another pause. You already bought your return ticket, Robert. You didn't need to do that. We were going to take care of it. It's just that I got a little scared of being stuck in Miami without a way to get home. Of course. Of course. I understand perfectly. Well, Robert, I'll let you continue having fun. We'll see you when you get back. Claire. Before you hang up, can I ask you something? Yes. Tell me, why did you decide to give me this trip as a gift? Now, Michael told me you had talked about me, but he didn't explain what specifically motivated this. Well, it's that lately we've noticed you very tired, Robert. Very stressed. And we thought you needed an extended rest. An extended rest. Yes, you know, to get away from everything for a while. Sometimes we need to completely disconnect from daily routine. The same words Michael had used as if they'd rehearsed the answer. I understand. Well, thank you very much for worrying about me. You're welcome, Robert. Take care of yourself and enjoy every moment. When I hung up, Carl and I looked at each other in silence. Robert Carl finally said to me, that conversation was even more revealing than yesterday's with Michael. Claire is clearly involved in the plan. The way she got nervous when you said you'd already bought the return ticket. It's like you'd ruined something they'd planned. On the third day of the cruise, Carl and I decided it was time to confront the man in the green shirt who had watched me, but we would do it cleverly in a public place where we'd be safe. After breakfast, we went down to the ship's casino. It was a perfect place full of people with lots of security cameras and ship crew nearby all the time. Carl had devised a brilliant plan. Robert, he explained to me as we walked toward the casino. I'm going to sit at a poker table near the entrance. You're going to sit alone at one of the slot machines. When that man appears, because I'm sure he will, you're going to act like you're a little drunk, like you had too much to drink at breakfast. Why? So he feels confident. So he thinks you're vulnerable. Predators always attack when they think the prey is weak. If he's really working with Michael, he'll take advantage of this opportunity to approach you. The plan worked perfectly. I had barely spent 20 minutes playing the slot machines, pretending to stagger slightly, and talking to myself as if I was seasick when I saw the man in the green shirt approaching. This time he was wearing a yellow shirt, but it was definitely the same person. Tall black hair, approximately 40 years old, with a smile that tried to be friendly, but gave me chills. "Excuse me, sir," he said to me, approaching my machine. "Are you okay? You seem a little tired." "Oh yeah," I replied, slightly slurring my words. "I think I had too many mimosas at breakfast. These vacations are driving me crazy." He smiled, and I could see in his eyes that he'd fallen into the trap. "Is this your first time on a cruise?" he asked me, sitting at the machine next to mine. "Yes, my son gave me this trip as a gift," he says. "I need to relax." I gave him exactly the information I knew he wanted to hear. What a thoughtful son. And where is he now? Is he on the cruise too? No, he stayed in Chicago. This is just for me. A special gift so I can relax completely. The man nodded, and I saw how his eyes gleamed with that information. Well, then you have to make the most of it. Have you explored the whole ship yet? Almost everything. Yesterday I was on the upper deck watching the sunset. It's beautiful, but it's a little scary being so close to the water. Scary. Why? "Oh, it's that I'm very clumsy," I said, laughing as if I were really drunk. "I'm always afraid of getting too close to the railings. With this rocking of the ship, you can fall so easily." The expression on his face changed subtly. It was as if he'd received very valuable information. "You're right to be careful," he told me with a voice that now sounded more calculating, especially at night. "The decks get slippery with the sea moisture." "Really? Oh, how terrible. Well, then I'd better stay in my cabin after dinner." "Oh, what floor is your cabin on?" There was the question we'd been waiting for. "On the 8th floor, 847. It has a beautiful balcony, but as I said, I'm afraid to lean over too much." The man smiled in a way that chilled my blood. "Well, sir, it was a pleasure meeting you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your cruise." "Very much." He got up and walked away quickly. From my position, I could see he headed directly to the ship's public phones. Carl had observed the entire conversation from his poker table. When the man walked away, he also got up and followed him discreetly. 15 minutes later, Carl came back to find me with an expression of urgency on his face. "Robert, we need to talk immediately in private." As we quickly went up to his cabin, and Carl closed the door with the lock. "Robert, that man made a call immediately after talking to you." I couldn't hear the whole conversation, but I clearly heard these words. "Yes, he's in 847 8th floor with balcony. He said he's afraid of getting close to the railings. Perfect for what we need." I felt like the air had left my lungs. "Carl, are you absolutely sure of what you heard?" "Absolutely, Robert. That man is definitely working with Michael, and now he knows exactly where to find you, and what's the best way to make your death look like an accident." I sat on the cabin sofa, feeling the weight of reality falling on me like an avalanche. What do we do now if Michael has someone here, and that someone already knows how he plans to kill me? "We're going to get ahead of them," Carl replied with a determination that calmed me. "Robert, you're not going to set foot in your cabin again for the rest of the trip. You're going to stay here with me where you're safe. But more importantly, we're going to set a trap." "What kind of trap?" "Tomorrow night will be the captain's gala party. Everyone will be in the main hall until late at night. That will be the perfect night for someone to try to enter your cabin or wait for you on your balcony." "Carl, I'm not going to use my life as bait. You won't need to, but we're going to use this opportunity to catch that man red-handed. We're going to notify ship security. We're going to set a trap." and we're going to get irrefutable evidence of what's happening. That afternoon, while we planned our strategy, my phone rang again. It was Michael, but this time his voice sounded different, more anxious. "Dad, how are you? Are you enjoying the cruise?" "Very well, son. Every day is a new adventure. Are you still sleeping well in your cabin? Haven't had problems with noise or anything?" A very specific question, as if he were verifying if I was still using my cabin. "No, son. I sleep perfectly. My cabin is very quiet." "That's good, Dad. Tomorrow is Thursday, isn't it? Do you have special plans?" "I think tomorrow is the captain's gala party. It's going to be very elegant." "Oh, yes. Those parties are beautiful. Are you going?" "Of course, I already have my green suit ready." "Perfect, Dad. Enjoy a lot." "What time do those parties usually end?" Another very specific question. Michael was collecting information about my schedule. I'm not sure. Probably late after midnight. "Well, when it's over, go straight to your cabin to rest. Don't walk around the decks at night. It can be dangerous." Carl looked at me with wide eyes. Michael had just given me specific instructions to go directly to my cabin after the party. The exact place where someone would be waiting for me. "Don't worry, son. I'll go straight to my room after the party." "Perfect, Dad. I love you very much. Sleep well." When I hung up, Carl and I remained silent for several minutes. "Robert," he finally said to me, "that conversation confirms everything. Michael knows exactly when the attack will be. He probably told that man himself that tomorrow night after the gala party, you'll be alone in your cabin." "Carl, I'm scared. This plan is becoming very real, very dangerous. I know Robert, but we're also very close to having all the evidence we need. One more night, and we'll have enough evidence to send Michael to jail for the rest of his life." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every noise in the hallway startled me. Every movement of the ship reminded me how vulnerable I was in the middle of the ocean. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in years. An inner strength, a fierce determination not to let myself be defeated. Michael had completely underestimated his father. He'd made the mistake of believing I was a defenseless old man who would give up easily. Tomorrow night, he was going to discover how wrong he was. On Thursday morning, Carl and I put the most crucial part of our plan into practice. We had to contact ship security without alerting the man who was watching me, and we needed to do it in a so that they would take us seriously. Carl suggested we go directly to Captain John Peterson. As a former businessman, he knew that going directly to the highest authority was the best way to ensure we'd be heard. "Robert," he explained to me as we prepared, "cruise ship captains are trained to handle all kinds of situations, kidnappings, robberies, murder attempts. He'll know exactly what to do." At 9 a.m., we presented ourselves at the captain's office. He was a man of approximately 50 years old, with gray hair and a presence that immediately inspired respect and confidence. "Gentlemen, I'm Captain John Peterson. How can I help you?" Carl took the initiative. "Captain, we have a very serious situation to report. Mr. Robert Sullivan is being watched by a suspicious man, and we have reason to believe his life is in danger." The captain invited us to sit down and listened attentively while we told the whole story. We showed him the recordings of the phone conversations with Michael and Claire. We explained about the one-way tickets and described in detail the man who had followed me. "Mr. Sullivan," the captain said when we finished, This is extremely serious. If what you're telling me is true, we're talking about a premeditated murder attempt on my ship. Captain, I replied, I understand it seems incredible, but every piece of evidence we've gathered points to the same conclusion. It doesn't seem incredible to me at all, the captain replied gravely. I've been sailing for 20 years, and I've seen everything. Greed can lead people to do unimaginable things, even to their own family members. Carl leaned forward. Captain, we have a plan to catch this man red-handed tonight during the gala party, but we need your help and your security team's cooperation. The captain listened to our plan in detail. It was risky, but clever. I would go to the gala party as planned, but instead of going to my cabin afterward, I would hide with Carl. Meanwhile, ship security would watch my cabin and the surrounding area to catch the suspicious man if he tried anything. It's a good plan, the captain admitted, but we're going to make some modifications to ensure your safety completely. He explained that they would install additional cameras near my cabin, that they would have security agents disguised as passengers in nearby corridors, and that they would give me a panic device I could activate from anywhere on the ship. Mr. Sullivan, the captain said before we left, I want you to know that from this moment on, you're under this ship's official protection. I won't allow anything to happen to you while you're under my responsibility. For the first time in days, I felt truly safe. The rest of the day passed slowly. Carl and I stayed in his cabin going over the plan several times, making sure we were prepared for any eventuality. At 5 p.m., we began getting ready for the gala party. It was important that I looked normal, that I didn't give any sign that I knew what was happening. I put on my most elegant green suit, styled my hair carefully, and prepared myself as if I were really excited for the party. Carl wore a beautiful golden suit that made him look sophisticated and confident. Robert, he said to me as we finished getting ready, tonight everything will change. Tomorrow morning, you'll be free of Michael forever, and he'll be facing the consequences of his actions. The gala party was spectacular. The ship's main hall had been transformed into a floating palace with elegant decorations, live music, and tables full of exquisite food. There were hundreds of elegantly dressed passengers dancing, laughing, enjoying the night, but I couldn't concentrate on the beauty of the party. My eyes constantly searched for the man in colored shirts, trying to locate him among the crowd. I found him near the bar this time, wearing a white shirt and a black suit. He seemed dressed for the occasion, but his eyes were fixed on me, following my every movement. Carl and I danced, ate, talked with other passengers, pretending it was a normal vacation night, but internally, we were both counting the minutes until we could put our plan into action. At 11:30 p.m., I decided it was time to make my move. I approached Carl and whispered, "It's time. I'm going to leave the main hall as if I were going to my cabin. You wait 5 minutes and follow me." I left the main hall, walking slowly, as if I were tired after a long night of partying. I took the elevator to the 8th floor where my cabin was. But instead of going to my room, I quickly headed toward the emergency stairs that led to the 12th floor. From the stairs, I could see the corridor leading to my cabin. It was deserted, lit only by the ship's nightlights. Carl arrived 5 minutes later, and together we hid in the stairs, watching my corridor through a small window. "See anything?" he whispered. "Not yet, but I'm sure he'll appear." We didn't have to wait long. At 12:15, we saw a figure moving stealthily through the corridor. It was the man in the white shirt, but now he was wearing black gloves and holding something in his hands that I couldn't identify. He headed directly to my cabin and stopped in front of the door. He took something from his pocket, probably lock-picking tools, and began working on the door. "Carl," I whispered. "He's entering my cabin. We need to alert security now." Carl immediately activated the panic device the captain had given us. A small red light began blinking, sending a silent signal to the security team. They managed to open my cabin door and entered. From our position, we could see he had a small flashlight and was inspecting the room. 3 minutes later, ship security agents began appearing in the corridor. They moved silently, surrounding my cabin from both sides. Suddenly, the man came out of my cabin and headed for the balcony. We continued watching him through the corridor windows. He was inspecting the balcony railing, as if planning exactly how to make my death look like an accident. That's when ship security acted. 3 agents entered the cabin, simultaneously surrounding the man before he could react. From our position in the stairs, we could hear the commotion when they arrested him. He was shouting, insisting he'd entered the cabin by mistake, that he'd gotten the wrong room. But when they searched his pockets, they found a small bottle with liquid lockpicking tools, and most incriminating of all, a cell phone with text messages from Michael. Carl and I went down to the 8th floor where Captain John was already supervising the situation. "Mr. Sullivan," the captain said, "we caught your attacker and found very interesting evidence." He showed me the man's cell phone. There were several messages from Michael with specific instructions. "Wait until after midnight. Make it look like he fell from the balcony by accident. Make sure there are no signs of struggle." I felt a mixture of relief and horror. Relief because I was alive and safe. Horror because I had final confirmation that my own son had paid someone to murder me. "Captain," I asked with a trembling voice, "what happens now?" "Mr. Sullivan, this man will be formally arrested when we reach port tomorrow, and you'll have all the evidence you need to prosecute your son for attempted murder." Friday morning was the longest of my life. After the man Michael had hired was arrested, Carl and I stayed awake in his cabin processing everything that had happened. Captain John had ordered the detainee to remain in a ship security cell until we reached port. Robert Carl said to me as we had coffee at 3 a.m., "Do you realize what we just did? We not only saved your life, but now we have irrefutable evidence to send Michael to jail." "I know," I replied, feeling a strange mixture of triumph and deep sadness. "But Carl, I also just discovered that my only son, the boy I raised with so much love, really wanted to see me dead. I don't know how I'll recover from this." "You'll recover because you're a stronger man than Michael ever imagined, and because now you'll have the opportunity to live your life free from his manipulation and cruelty." At 6 a.m., Detective Harrison called me from Chicago. He'd worked all night investigating Michael's finances. "Mr. Sullivan," he told me with an excited voice, "I found exactly what we were looking for. Your son has gambling debts of over $200,000 with very dangerous loan sharks. But that's not all. What else did you find? Michael has been forging your signature on bank documents for months. He used your house as collateral for several loans without your knowledge. If you had died, he would have inherited everything and been able to pay his debts. But Robert, there's one more thing you need to know. Tell me. Claire is also in debt up to her neck. She has overdue credit cards for more than $50,000. Both were desperate for money, and your death was the only solution they saw. Each new revelation was like a dagger to the heart. Not only Michael, but also Claire had planned my death for money. Detective Harrison, what do we need to do now? When you return to Chicago tomorrow, we'll go straight to the police station. With all the evidence we have, Michael and Claire will be arrested immediately. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long time. Carl respected my need to process everything I'd heard. Finally, I decided it was time to do something I'd been putting off. Call Michael. Carl, I said, I want to call Michael now. I want to hear his voice when I tell him I know everything he's done. Are you sure, Robert? This could be dangerous. If he realizes his plan failed, I don't care about danger anymore. I'm tired of pretending. Tired of acting like the naive father who doesn't know anything. I want him to know his father isn't the foolish old man he thought. I dialed Michael's number. He answered on the second ring. Dad, what a surprise. How did you wake up? Did you sleep well after the party? His voice sounded falsely cheerful as always, but now I could hear the lie behind every word. Hello, Michael. Yes, I slept very well. But I have to tell you something very interesting that happened last night. What happened, Dad? Well, after the party, when I returned to my cabin, I found a man trying to enter my room. Can you believe that? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. A man. What kind of man? A man about 40 years old. Ship security arrested him. And you know what's strangest, Michael? What, Dad? When they searched his phone, they found messages from you. Messages where you gave instructions on how to kill me and make it look like an accident. The silence that followed was deafening. It lasted so long, I thought Michael had hung up. Michael, are you still there? Dad, he finally said, with a completely different voice, cold and calculating. I don't know what you're talking about. That's impossible. It's impossible, Michael. I have recordings of all our phone conversations. I have evidence that you never bought my return ticket. I have proof that you hired a killer. And the detective I hired has evidence of all your gambling debts and the fraudulent loans you took using my house. Another long silence. You hired a detective, Dad. Have you gone crazy? No. Michael, I've become smart for the first time in my life. I stopped blindly trusting you and started using my brain. Dad, I think the stress of the trip is affecting you. You're saying things that don't make sense. They don't make sense, Michael. Your plan failed. The man you hired is arrested. I'm alive. And tomorrow when I return to Chicago, you're going to be arrested for attempted murder. Dad, you need to calm down. When you get home, we'll talk calmly. You're confused. I'm not confused, Michael. I'm disappointed. I'm discouraged. I'm sad for having raised a son who valued money more than his own father's life. But I'm not confused. And don't call me Dad ever again, I said with a firmness I didn't know I had. A father is someone who's respected, loved, protected. You only saw me as an obstacle between you and my money. Listen to me well, Michael. When I arrive in Chicago tomorrow, I'm going to hand over all the evidence to the police station. I'm going to testify against you, and I'm going to make sure you spend the rest of your life in jail thinking about what you did to the man who gave you life. Dad, you can't do that. I'm your son. A son doesn't try to kill his father. A monster. Yes. I hung up the phone. Carl hugged me while tears rolled down my face. They weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation, anger, relief, pain. It was as if all the feelings from the past days were coming out of me at the same time. Robert Carl said to me softly, "What you just did required incredible courage. That wasn't the end of a relationship. That was the birth of a new Robert, a man who will never again allow anyone to abuse his kindness." The rest of the day we spent preparing for the return to Chicago. Captain John helped us organize all the evidence, the recordings of phone conversations, security reports, witness statements, photos of the arrested man, and the objects found with him, Mr. Sullivan. The captain told me before dinner, "I want you to know that in my 20 years sailing, I've never seen a man demonstrate as much courage and determination as you've demonstrated this week. Your son completely underestimated his own father." That night, my last night on the cruise, Carl and I had dinner in the main restaurant for the first time since the first day. I no longer had to hide, no longer had to pretend, no longer had to be afraid. "Carl," I said, as we toasted with champagne, "I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for me. You saved my life. Robert, you saved your own life. I was just your adventure companion. But I want you to know that this experience has changed me too. It reminded me that men our age still have a lot to offer the world, a lot of strength to show. What are you going to do when we get back to land? I'm going back to Denver, and I'm going to start living my life more fully. And you, Robert, what are you going to do? I'm going to make sure Michael pays for what he did. And then I'm going to start living for myself for the first time in 64 years. On Saturday morning, when the cruise ship arrived at the port of Miami, I was no longer the same man who had boarded that vessel 7 days earlier. I was Robert Sullivan, but a completely new version of myself, stronger, smarter, more determined than ever. Carl and I said goodbye at the port with tears in our eyes, but also with the promise to keep in touch forever. He had been more than a friend during those crucial days. He had been my brother, my ally, my savior. "Robert," he said to me as we hugged for the last time, "remember that you're no longer the man who sacrifices in silence. You're the man who fights for his life and wins. Never forget that strength you discovered. I'll never forget Carl, and I'll never forget that when I needed someone most, you appeared like an angel in my life." My flight to Chicago left at 3 p.m. I had enough time to call Detective Harrison and confirm that everything was ready for what was coming. "Mr. Sullivan, the detective, told me I have everything prepared. The moment you land, we're going straight to the police station. The chief has already reviewed all the evidence I sent him and is ready to proceed with the arrest warrants." During the flight back to Chicago, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. A week ago, I was a 64-year-old man living in silence who had dedicated his entire life to pleasing others, who had allowed himself to be underestimated and ignored. But those 7 days on the cruise had transformed me completely. I had discovered that I had a strategic intelligence I'd never used, a courage I'd never demonstrated, a determination I'd never needed. When the plane landed in Chicago, Detective Harrison was waiting for me at the airport. He was a man of approximately 50 years old, tall, with gray hair, and a presence that immediately inspired confidence. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, shaking my hand, "it's an honor to finally meet you. What you accomplished on that cruise was extraordinary. Detective, I just did what I had to do to survive." "No, sir. You did much more than survive. You orchestrated your own son's downfall with a precision that even the most experienced detectives admire." We went directly to the police station, where Chief Carlos Martinez was waiting for us. He was a serious man of approximately 40 years old, who had meticulously reviewed all the evidence. "Mr. Sullivan," the chief said to me after hearing my complete statement, "in my 15 years as chief, I've never seen a case so well documented by the victim himself. The recordings, the financial evidence, the cruise crew, statements, everything forms a case as solid as a rock." "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we issue arrest warrants for Michael Sullivan for attempted murder, criminal conspiracy, and financial fraud. For Claire Sullivan for criminal conspiracy and complicity in attempted murder. Both will be arrested before the day ends." 2 hours later, I was sitting in my living room in my own house waiting. Detective Harrison had insisted on staying with me until Michael and Claire were arrested, in case they tried something desperate. At 6 p.m., my phone rang. It was Chief Martinez. "Mr. Sullivan, I have news. Michael and Claire have been arrested. We found them at their house, apparently preparing to flee the country. They had packed suitcases and plane tickets to Toronto." I felt a mixture of relief and deep sadness. Relief because I was finally completely safe. Sadness for the final confirmation that my son really had wanted me dead. What will happen to them now? They'll be prosecuted by justice. With all the evidence we have, they'll probably receive long prison sentences. Michael is facing charges that could lead him to 20 years in jail. Claire, as an accomplice, is facing up to 10 years. That night alone in my house, for the first time in a week, I sat in my favorite armchair and reflected on everything that had changed in my life. I no longer had to live in fear of my own son. I no longer had to pretend I didn't know how cruel he was. I no longer had to sacrifice my well-being for someone who didn't value me. But more importantly, I had discovered something about myself that I'd never known. I was capable of fighting for my own life and winning. The following months were a whirlwind of legal procedures. I had to testify at trial, confront Michael in court, relive all the details of his betrayal. It was painful, but also liberating. During the trial, Michael tried to act like the repentant son, like a man who had made a terrible mistake, but really loved his father. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, text messages, the testimony of the man he'd hired to kill me, the financial evidence, everything painted the picture of a man who had coldly planned his own father's murder. On the day the sentence was announced, Michael was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Claire received 8 years. When I heard the verdict, I didn't feel joy, but I felt justice. After the trial, I made important decisions about my life. I sold the house where I'd lived for so many years, the house full of painful memories. With the money from the sale, I bought a small, comfortable apartment in a new area of the city. But most importantly was what I did with my time and energy. I began working as a volunteer at a help center for older men who had been victims of family abuse. My experience had taught me that many men my age suffered in silence, allowing their own family members to mistreat them because they believed they had no options. Gentlemen, I would say to the men who came to the center seeking help, I want to tell you the story of how my own son tried to kill me, and how I managed not only to survive but also to bring him to justice. Every time I told my story, I saw in those men's eyes the same awakening I had experienced on the cruise. The understanding that they weren't condemned to be victims, that they had more strength and resources than they imagined. Carl and I maintained our friendship through weekly phone calls and occasional visits. He had become more than a friend. He was my battle brother, the person who had helped me discover who I really was. A year after the cruise, Carl came to visit me in Chicago. We were having dinner in my new apartment when he asked me a question that surprised me. "Robert, have you ever regretted exposing Michael? Have you ever felt nostalgic for the relationship you had before Carl?" I replied without hesitation. The relationship I thought I had with Michael never really existed. It was an illusion based on my need to believe I'd raised a good man. The truth is that Michael was always manipulative, always selfish, always saw me as a means to get what he wanted. I just didn't want to see it. And don't you miss having family? "I have family," I said, smiling. "I have you. I have the men at the center who have become my brothers. I have a life full of people who value me for who I am and not for what they can get from me." On my second anniversary back from the cruise, I decided to do something that would symbolize my complete transformation. I signed up for dance classes. At 66 years old, I learned to dance swing salsa and ballroom. Mr. Sullivan said my dance instructor, a 30-year-old young man named Luis. "I've never seen someone your age move with such confidence and grace. Where did you learn to have such self-confidence?" "I learned at sea," I replied with a smile. "I learned that when a man fights for his life, he discovers a strength he never knew he had." Now, when I look back at those 7 days on the cruise, I don't see them as the darkest days of my life. I see them as the days that saved me, the days that taught me who I really was. I am Robert Sullivan, a man who survived the deepest betrayal imaginable. I'm a man who transformed his own son from hunter to prey. I'm a man who at 64 years old discovered it's never too late to be reborn. And if any other man my age feels defenseless, underestimated, or betrayed by his own family, I want him to know he has a strength within him that can move mountains. He just needs to decide to use it. Because when a man like me says, "If that's how you want it, my dear, have it your way. But you're going to regret it 3 times over," he's not making an empty threat. He's making a promise he'll keep to the very end. And Michael regretted it. He regretted it when he was arrested. He regretted it when he was convicted, and he'll continue regretting it. Every day of the next 18 years, he'll spend in prison remembering that he completely underestimated the man who gave him life. Did you like my story, and what city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can continue bringing more stories like this. I already thank you very much for the support. I'm waiting for your comments about the story. In the video, you can see 2 new life stories that I recommend from the heart. There's much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. Until the next life story, with affection and respect from Father's advice.